Sacred darkness. Embrace the hidden to illuminate the self. Within this seeming contradiction lies a wellspring of untapped potential, waiting to be integrated. For just as a painter uses shadow to bring forth depth, so too does darkness exist within the individual psyche to allow light to truly shine. Esoteric traditions speak of black suns and dark nights, metaphors that point toward the power of sacred darkness. But how can something seemingly negative hold the key to such profound transformation? The exploration of what many consider the shadow self has been given a modern frame, most famously by the work of Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, whose pioneering work delved into the depths of the unconscious mind. Jung's work on understanding the self was a radical act at the time, and still is, and his revolutionary approach to understanding the human psyche, with its archetypes, its process of individuation, and its exploration of the phenomenon of projection, paved the way for a deeper understanding of the hidden aspects of ourselves. Yet the concept of the shadow self is not unique to Jungian psychology. Since the beginning of time, across cultures and throughout history, figures embodying darkness, chaos, and the unknown have emerged in myths, legends, and religious texts. Consider, for example, the figure of Set in Egyptian mythology, a god often associated with darkness, chaos, and the desert, but who also represented necessary change and transformation. Or, in Norse mythology, Loki, the trickster god, embodies ambiguity, mischief, and the disruption of order. Even in modern everyday life, we see shadow at play, for example in gossip and envy. These figures, while often feared or reviled, represent disowned aspects of the human psyche, the very qualities we often try to suppress or deny. It is important to realize that the shadow contains not only negative qualities like repressed emotions and destructive impulses, but also hidden talents, untapped potential, and even positive attributes that we have disowned because they don't fit with our conscious self-image. However, it can also be violent. Culturally, we have been conditioned to suppress our shadow selves, to present a socially acceptable persona to the world while relegating our darker impulses and hidden desires to the depths of the unconscious. This suppression, while seemingly necessary for maintaining social order, can lead to psychological distress, internal conflict, and a diminished sense of wholeness. Indeed, this aversion to darkness and negativity is a hallmark of our modern age, where positivity is often valued above authenticity. How, then, do we integrate our shadow selves, embrace our sacred darkness, and find wholeness in what we hide? We will explore the origins of the shadow concept, examining its manifestations in mythology and everyday life, and discuss practical techniques for integrating it into our conscious awareness. By the end of this exploration, you will have a deeper understanding of yourself, increased self-awareness, and a practical roadmap for embracing your full potential. Let us begin with an exploration of the sacred dark. How does the shadow originate, and why does it seem to hold such sway over our lives? The genesis of the shadow lies in the formative years of childhood, a period of intense development and socialization where the fledgling ego begins to take shape. Unlike adults, children are not born with a fully formed sense of self. Instead, they are fluid beings, absorbing the values, expectations, and judgments of their parents and the surrounding culture like sponges. This process of internalization is crucial for developing a sense of belonging and navigating the social world. However, it also comes at a cost. As children learn to distinguish between good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable, they begin to repress those qualities deemed undesirable by their caregivers and society. A child might be told that anger is wrong, that boys don't cry, or that girls should be quiet and obedient. These messages, repeated over time, lead the child to disown these aspects of themselves, pushing them into the unconscious realm that Jung termed the shadow. The shadow, therefore, is not simply a collection of negative traits, but rather a repository of all that we have rejected and disowned in the process of becoming civilized. It is a byproduct of our early attempts to fit in and gain approval, a necessary sacrifice for belonging. Crucially intertwined with the formation of the shadow is the development of the persona. The persona, derived from the Latin word for mask, is the face we present to the world, the role we play in society. It is the curated version of ourselves that we believe will be most acceptable and successful. While the persona serves a vital function in helping us navigate social interactions, it can also contribute to the power and intensity of the shadow. The more rigidly we cling to our persona, the more we suppress those qualities that don't fit the image, thus strengthening the shadow's hold on our unconscious. A politician, for example, might cultivate a persona of unwavering strength and moral rectitude, while simultaneously repressing their own vulnerabilities, doubts, and imperfections into the shadow. The greater the distance between the persona and the true self, the more potent and potentially destructive the shadow becomes. Qualities that are commonly repressed into the shadow include a wide range of emotions, impulses, and desires. Anger, often judged negatively by society, is frequently relegated to the shadow, along with aggression, sexuality, vulnerability, and even creativity. These qualities are not inherently negative. In fact, they can be powerful sources of energy, passion, and connection. However, when judged negatively by society and repressed into the shadow, they get distorted. A person who is taught that anger is unacceptable may suppress their feelings, leading to resentment, passive aggressiveness, or even explosive outbursts. Similarly, someone who is shamed for their sexuality may develop feelings of guilt, shame, and repression, leading to difficulties in intimacy and self-expression. However, if the shadow is initially composed of natural human qualities, then how does it become a source of violence and destruction? The answer lies in the fact that repressed qualities do not simply disappear. Instead, they fester and become distorted in the darkness of the unconscious. Like a wound left untreated, they can become infected, leading to psychological distress and maladaptive behaviors. Repressed anger can turn into rage, repressed sexuality can turn into perversion, and repressed creativity can turn into self-sabotage. The key is conscious integration. By consciously acknowledging and integrating these disowned qualities, we can transform them from destructive forces into sources of strength, creativity, and authenticity. The effects of shadow run deep, influencing not only our individual well-being, but also the dynamics of our relationships and the functioning of society as a whole. What happens when this shadow gets projected outward? Psychological projection, as conceptualized by Sigmund Freud and later expanded upon by Carl Jung, is an unconscious defense mechanism whereby we attribute our own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, and impulses to others. It's a subtle, often imperceptible way of distancing ourselves from the uncomfortable aspects of our inner world, effectively seeing our own darkness reflected in the behavior of those around us. As Jung writes, everything that is unconscious irritates us. Projection allows us to maintain a sense of moral superiority, casting others as the villains in our own internal dramas. But what happens when we fail to recognize this mechanism operating within ourselves? In everyday life, shadow projection manifests in a myriad of ways. Have you ever found yourself intensely disliking someone for a seemingly irrational reason? Perhaps they possess a quality that you secretly envy or despise in yourself. This is projection at work. We often judge others most harshly for the very traits we struggle to accept in ourselves. Gossip, for example, is a prime breeding ground for shadow projection, as we project our own insecurities and judgmental attitudes onto others, often exaggerating their flaws while conveniently overlooking our own. The rise of social media has amplified these tendencies, creating echo chambers of negativity and online shaming, where individuals are quick to condemn others for perceived transgressions, often without any real understanding of the context or motivations involved. In today's world, where information is readily available and opinions are easily shared, shadow projections can spread like wildfire, leading to online pile-ons and the destruction of reputations. In relationships, the dangers of projection are even more pronounced. When we project our disowned qualities onto our partners, we fail to see them as they truly are, instead viewing them through a distorted lens of our own making. This can lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, and ultimately, the erosion of intimacy and trust. For example, if you struggle with feelings of inadequacy, you might project this onto your partner, constantly criticizing their appearance, their accomplishments, or their abilities. This not only damages their self-esteem, but also prevents you from addressing your own feelings of inadequacy. Similarly, if you have a fear of abandonment, you might project this onto your partner, becoming overly jealous and possessive, ultimately pushing them away. Such projections can sabotage even the most loving relationships, creating a cycle of conflict and disappointment. However, these individual projections can gather steam until they take on a life of their own. When individuals fail to realize their projections, they can fall prey to the collective shadow, a phenomenon with terrifying consequences. Nazi Germany serves as a chilling example. The German people, burdened by economic hardship and national humiliation, projected their shadow onto the Jewish population, scapegoating them for all their woes. This projection, fueled by propaganda and charismatic leadership, ultimately led to the Holocaust, one of the darkest chapters in human history. As Jung himself warned, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. And it is not just a historical phenomenon. In today's polarized political landscape, we see similar dynamics at play, with opposing sides demonizing each other, projecting their own fears and anxieties onto their rivals, and creating an atmosphere of hostility and division. What they often fail to realize is that this political opposition are not that different from themselves. Given this dark urgency to embrace the shadow, what positive force could be hidden within? While the shadow is often perceived as a repository of negativity, it is crucial to recognize that it also contains positive qualities and untapped potential. It is not simply a dumping ground for undesirable traits, but rather a treasure trove of hidden talents, creative impulses, and even virtues that we have disowned because they don't fit with our conscious self-image. These qualities are often the opposite of our conscious strengths, providing a counterbalance to our dominant traits. Someone who presents a persona of unwavering rationality, for example, might have a hidden capacity for intuition and emotional intelligence within their shadow. Therefore, if we are to embrace the shadow, positive qualities must be embraced as well. Consider, for instance, how repressed anger can be a source of passion and assertiveness. Many individuals, particularly women, are taught from a young age to suppress their anger, to be agreeable and accommodating at all costs. However, this repression can stifle their ability to stand up for themselves, to assert their needs and boundaries, and to fight for what they believe in. By consciously reclaiming their anger, they can tap into a powerful source of energy and determination, becoming more effective advocates for themselves and others. Similarly, repressed vulnerability can lead to greater empathy and connection. In a society that often values strength and independence above all else, vulnerability is often seen as a weakness. However, by embracing our vulnerability, we open ourselves up to deeper levels of intimacy, compassion, and understanding. The persona and shadow are not always opposites. Often, people try to use their persona to shield their shadow. Indeed, many artists, writers, and musicians have tapped into their shadow selves to create some of the most transformative works of art. Writers delve into dark themes and difficult emotions, exploring the complexities of the human condition and challenging societal norms. Artists use disturbing imagery and provocative symbolism to confront viewers with uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world around them. Musicians channel their pain, their rage, and their longing into powerful melodies and lyrics that resonate with audiences on a deep emotional level. By venturing into the depths of their own shadows, These artists are able to create works that are both cathartic and transformative, offering a glimpse into the hidden corners of the human psyche. For example, look at the music of 9 Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson, whose shadow elements made their work stand out. Understanding the shadow is not only essential for personal growth, but also opens up new avenues for creative expression and innovative thought. It allows us to break free from the constraints of our conscious mind, to explore uncharted territory, and to discover hidden depths within ourselves. Just as Persephone descended into the underworld to emerge with newfound wisdom and power, so too must we confront our own shadows to unlock our full potential. But how can we consciously reclaim these disowned qualities and integrate them into our conscious awareness, transforming them from sources of darkness into sources of light? In summary, we have explored the origins of the shadow, tracing its roots back to our early childhood experiences and the formation of the persona. We have examined the phenomenon of shadow projection, revealing how we often see our own darkness reflected in others. And we have uncovered the hidden gold within the shadow, recognizing that it contains not only negative qualities, but also untapped potential and creative impulses. As such, understanding the shadow is crucial for personal growth, self-awareness, and the journey toward wholeness. It requires us to move beyond fear and judgment, to embrace the full spectrum of our being, and to recognize that even in the darkest corners of our psyche, there is the potential for light to shine through. But where do we go from here? Shadow work, as it is often called, is a lifelong process of self-discovery and integration. It is not a one-time event, but rather an ongoing journey of self-reflection, exploration, and acceptance. It requires us to be willing to confront our deepest fears, to acknowledge our darkest impulses, and to embrace the parts of ourselves that we have long rejected. This journey is not always easy, and it often involves facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. But it is through this process of conscious integration that we can truly come to know ourselves, to heal our wounds, and to unlock our full potential. In the next section, we will delve into practical techniques for shadow integration, exploring tools such as active imagination, dream analysis, and spiritual practices that can help us navigate the complexities of the unconscious mind. By learning to work with our shadows, rather than against them, we can transform them from sources of darkness into sources of strength, creativity, and authenticity, leading to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. Remember, the clock is always ticking. With the clock always ticking, how can we consciously reclaim these disowned qualities and integrate them into our conscious awareness, transforming them from sources of darkness into sources of light? Fortunately, there are several powerful tools and techniques available to those who dare to venture into the shadow realm. One of the most effective is active imagination, a method developed by Carl Jung for consciously engaging with the unconscious mind, and more specifically, with the shadow. But what does active imagination entail, and how can it help us to integrate our disowned selves? Active imagination is a technique that bridges the gap between the conscious and unconscious realms, allowing us to interact with our inner world in a safe and meaningful way. Unlike passive daydreaming or fantasy, active imagination involves consciously engaging with inner images, fantasies, and dreams, treating them as autonomous entities with their own perspectives and agendas. It's a process of entering a meditative state, quieting the rational mind, and allowing images to arise spontaneously from the unconscious. The crucial step is to resist the urge to control or censor these images, instead allowing them to unfold naturally, as if watching a movie unfold in the theater of your mind. Once an image has arisen, the next step is to interact with it, to ask questions, to listen to its perspective, and to engage in a dialogue. This is particularly important when encountering shadow figures, as it allows us to understand their motivations, their fears, and their desires. In fact, the act of giving the shadow a voice, of listening to its perspective without judgment, is often the first step towards integration. But how do you actually do active imagination? The process of active imagination begins with relaxation and visualization. Find a quiet space where you will not be disturbed and settle into a comfortable position. Close your eyes and take several deep breaths, allowing your body and mind to relax. Once you are feeling calm and centered, begin to visualize a scene or image that resonates with you. This could be a place from your past, a scene from a dream, or simply a landscape that appeals to your imagination. Allow the image to become vivid and detailed, engaging all of your senses. Once the scene is established, invite a shadow figure to appear. This could be a person, an animal, a monster, or any other being that embodies qualities you have disowned or repressed. When the shadow figure appears, resist the urge to judge or reject it. Instead, approach it with curiosity and openness. Ask it questions, listen to its answers, and allow the interaction to unfold naturally. Record these interactions in a journal, paying attention to the emotions, thoughts, and sensations that arise. This process can be challenging, as it may involve confronting difficult emotions and disturbing images. However, it is through this process of conscious engagement that we can begin to understand and accept our disowned qualities. What, though, can you expect to gain? And what challenges might you face? The benefits of active imagination are numerous. It can provide profound insights into the workings of the unconscious mind, helping us to understand the root causes of our behaviors, our fears, and our desires. It can also help us to resolve inner conflicts, to integrate fragmented aspects of ourselves, and to unlock hidden creativity. By giving the shadow a voice, we can learn to accept and even appreciate those qualities that we have long rejected. However, active imagination is not without its challenges. It can be difficult to quiet the rational mind and allow images to arise spontaneously. It can also be disturbing to encounter difficult emotions and frightening shadow figures. It is essential to approach this practice with caution and self-compassion, recognizing that it is a process of exploration, not a test of worthiness. Indeed, it is also recommended to seek guidance from a qualified therapist or analyst when dealing with overwhelming shadow material. Consider the case of a woman named Sarah, who struggled with feelings of anger and resentment towards her mother. She had always prided herself on being a calm and rational person, but beneath the surface, she harbored a deep well of repressed anger. Through active imagination, Sarah encountered a shadow figure that embodied her rage and resentment. Initially, she was frightened and repulsed by this figure. However, as she continued to engage with it, she began to understand the source of her anger. She realized that she had been suppressing her own needs and desires in order to please her mother, and that her anger was a natural response to this self-sacrifice. Through active imagination, Sarah was able to acknowledge and accept her anger, and to set healthier boundaries in her relationship with her mother. This led to a significant improvement in her overall well-being and her ability to express herself authentically. But active imagination is not the only path into the shadow. What other routes might we explore? Another powerful tool for deciphering the shadow's messages is dream analysis. In Jungian psychology, dreams are not simply random firings of neurons, but rather symbolic expressions of the unconscious mind, offering a glimpse into the hidden dynamics of our psyche. Dreams often feature shadow figures and themes that reflect disowned aspects of the self, providing valuable insights into the qualities we have repressed or rejected. The importance here is understanding that the dream is not literal. Instead, dreams communicate in symbolic language, and it is our task to learn to decipher these symbols, to unlock the hidden meanings they hold. But how can we learn to interpret dream symbols and identify shadow elements? One helpful framework for interpreting dream symbols is the concept of amplification. Amplification involves exploring dream symbols through mythology, folklore, and personal associations, expanding our understanding of their potential meanings. For example, if you dream of a wolf, you might research the symbolism of wolves in different cultures, exploring their associations with wilderness, instinct, aggression, and transformation. You might also consider your own personal associations with wolves, such as memories of childhood stories or encounters with these animals in nature. By amplifying the symbol of the wolf, you can gain a deeper understanding of its significance in your dream. In addition to amplification, it is also helpful to identify common shadow figures in dreams, such as monsters, villains, and tricksters. These figures often represent disowned aspects of the self, embodying qualities that we fear, despise, or reject. By paying attention to the emotions and interactions within the dream, we can begin to understand the messages that these figures are trying to convey. But even with a framework, are there dangers to dream analysis? Of course, dream analysis is not without its ethical considerations and potential pitfalls. It is essential to approach dreams with humility and openness, recognizing that they are complex and multifaceted expressions of the unconscious mind. We must also be cautious against overinterpreting or imposing our own personal biases on dream symbols. Dreams are highly subjective, and their meanings can vary depending on the individual's unique experiences and cultural background. It is also recommended to seek guidance from a qualified therapist or analyst when dealing with difficult or disturbing dreams, as they may be indicative of underlying psychological issues that require professional attention. Consider the example of a man named David, who had a recurring dream featuring a threatening figure lurking in the shadows. Initially, David dismissed this dream as a product of stress and anxiety. However, as he began to explore the dream through dream analysis, he realized that the threatening figure represented his own repressed anger. He had been taught from a young age that anger was unacceptable, and he had suppressed his feelings for many years. Through dream work, David was able to acknowledge and integrate his anger, learning to express it in a healthy and constructive way. This led to significant changes in his behavior and his relationships, as he became more assertive, more confident, and more authentic. These processes may take time and effort, but even with a greater understanding of the shadow, that doesn't guarantee that it is a comfortable process. How can we transform these difficult emotions into valuable sources of energy and wisdom, rather than allowing them to fester and consume us? One of the most common tendencies is to avoid or suppress difficult emotions such as anger, fear, shame, and grief. These emotions are often associated with the shadow and seen as negative, as something to be feared or avoided. However, suppressing these emotions only strengthens the shadow and leads to psychological distress, as the repressed energy festers and distorts in the unconscious mind. Suppressing these negative emotions can manifest physically in the form of ulcers, heart disease, and a variety of stress-related ailments. A far more effective approach is to embrace the concept of emotional alchemy, transforming difficult emotions into valuable sources of energy and wisdom. But how is such transformation possible? Emotional alchemy involves consciously acknowledging and experiencing difficult emotions without judgment, allowing them to arise and pass through us like waves in the ocean. It also involves exploring the underlying needs and unmet desires that drive these emotions, seeking to understand their root causes. When rage is embraced safely, it can lead to creative endeavors such as the creation and performance of heavy metal music, the furious strokes of a painter expressing political frustration, or the impassioned words of a writer protesting injustice. Rage doesn't need to be destructive when channeled consciously. Rather than suppressing our emotions, we can learn to work with them, transforming them from sources of suffering into sources of strength and creativity. Practically speaking, how can this be done? There are several techniques for working with difficult emotions in a healthy and constructive way. Mindfulness meditation, for example, can help us to observe our emotions without judgment, allowing us to experience them fully without getting carried away by them. Somatic experiencing, a body-centered therapy, can help us to release trapped emotional energy from the body, resolving trauma and promoting healing. Journaling and art therapy can provide a safe and non-judgmental outlet for for expressing and processing emotions, allowing us to gain insight into their underlying causes. And of course, seeking support from a therapist or support group can provide valuable guidance and support as we navigate the complexities of our emotional landscape. Consider the example of a man named John, who had always struggled with feelings of fear and anxiety. He had a tendency to avoid risky situations, to play it safe, and to stay within his comfort zone. Through emotional alchemy, John learned to transform his fear into courage and resilience. He began to consciously confront his fears, taking small steps outside of his comfort zone and gradually expanding his horizons. He also learned to reframe his fear as a signal that he was about to grow, that he was on the verge of something new and exciting. This led to significant improvements in his self-esteem and his overall well-being as he became more confident, more adventurous, and more willing to take risks. But individual effort can only take us so far. What role does ritual play? Ritual and ceremony can be powerful tools for shadow integration, providing a structured way to engage with the unconscious mind and enact symbolic transformations. Rituals can help us to honor the shadow, to acknowledge its presence in our lives, and to integrate its qualities into our conscious awareness. These rituals can take many forms, from simple acts of self-reflection to elaborate ceremonies involving music, dance, and storytelling. The key is to create a personal ritual that resonates with you, that feels meaningful and authentic. Creative expression, as well, plays a vital role in bringing the shadow into conscious awareness. Art, music, dance, and writing can provide a safe and non-judgmental outlet for expressing shadow qualities, allowing us to explore difficult emotions, challenge limiting beliefs, and reclaim disowned aspects of the self. For example, you might create a shadow self-portrait through painting or drawing, exploring the qualities you have hidden from yourself and from the world. You might write shadow poems or songs, giving voice to your fears, your desires, and your longings. The possibilities are endless. To summarize, we have explored a variety of techniques for shadow integration, including active imagination, dream analysis, emotional alchemy, and ritual and creative expression. Each of these techniques offers a unique path into the shadow realm, providing opportunities for self-discovery, healing, and transformation. It is important to remember that shadow integration is a lifelong journey, not a one-time event. It requires ongoing self-reflection, exploration, and acceptance. Experiment with different techniques, find what works best for you, and be patient with yourself as you navigate the complexities of the unconscious mind. But while these tools may seem powerful on their own, there is a greater power at play that will give these techniques greater effect. What is it? Individual effort can only take us so far, but what greater power gives these techniques greater effect? The answer, perhaps surprisingly, lies in understanding the interconnectedness of the personal shadow and the collective shadow, two sides of the same coin. Jung distinguished between these two aspects of the unconscious, framing them as interdependent forces that shape both individual and societal behavior. The personal shadow, as we've explored, comprises individual repressed qualities, the disowned aspects of our personal history. The collective shadow, on the other hand, is the accumulation of societal disowned traits, the shared pool of repressed emotions and destructive impulses within a society or group. But how do these two shadows interact, and what are the dangers of neglecting their interplay? The dangers of neglecting the personal shadow are manifold, not least because it profoundly influences our susceptibility to the collective shadow. Unacknowledged personal shadow qualities can be exploited by collective shadow forces, making us more vulnerable to manipulation and ideological narratives. Consider the concept of groupthink, the psychological phenomenon in which the desire for harmony or conformity in a group results in irrational or dysfunctional decision-making. When individuals suppress their own doubts or dissenting opinions in order to align with the group, they are essentially allowing their personal shadow to be overridden by the collective shadow. This suppression of individual dissent and critical thinking can have disastrous consequences, as seen in numerous historical and contemporary examples, from the Bay of Pigs invasion to the Iraq War. Ignoring the personal shadow, therefore, not only hinders individual growth, but also enables the collective shadow to exert its destructive influence on a larger scale. Individuals who are unaware of their own shadow qualities are far more easily manipulated by propaganda and ideological narratives, particularly those that exploit fear, resentment, and prejudice. Authoritarian regimes, for example, often rely on shadow projections to demonize out groups and consolidate power, creating a climate of hatred and violence. Consider the rise of Nazi Germany, where the Jewish population was scapegoated as the embodiment of all that was wrong with German society. This projection of disowned qualities onto a marginalized group allowed the Nazi regime to unify the in-group and justify increasingly draconian measures, culminating in the Holocaust. The collective shadow, therefore, is expressed and reinforced by media narratives, political rhetoric, and cultural norms that perpetuate stereotypes, promote division, and suppress critical thinking. Indeed, the collective shadow is always in flux, constantly adapting to changing social and political landscapes, making it all the more insidious and difficult to combat. If the personal shadow makes one so susceptible to the collective shadow, is there a method to inoculate oneself from its negative effects? Conscious awareness and integration of the personal shadow can indeed provide a buffer against collective shadow influences. By acknowledging and accepting our own disowned qualities, we become less likely to project them onto others and less susceptible to manipulation by those who seek to exploit our fears and prejudices. This requires cultivating critical thinking, independent judgment, and moral courage, the willingness to stand up for our values even when it is unpopular or uncomfortable. The next step, then, is to delve into the dynamics of the collective shadow in more detail, to understand how it manifests in society and how we can begin to address it. The collective shadow can be defined as the shared pool of repressed emotions, disowned qualities, and destructive impulses within a society or group. Shaped by cultural norms, historical traumas, and dominant ideologies, the collective shadow manifests in various forms, such as prejudice, discrimination, violence, and social injustice. It is not a static entity, but rather a dynamic force that is constantly evolving and adapting to changing social and political contexts. The collective shadow is always in flux, influenced by events, leaders, and cultural shifts. Think of how a national tragedy can bring out both the best and worst in people, revealing both compassion and prejudice that were previously hidden beneath the surface. But just how deeply does the collective shadow influence individual behavior, even among those who consider themselves enlightened? Even those who consider themselves enlightened are not immune to the influence of the collective shadow. Consider the concept of moral hypocrisy, the tendency for individuals to rationalize unethical actions within a group context, often by invoking higher principles or justifying their behavior as necessary for the greater good. This allows individuals to participate in harmful behaviors while still maintaining a sense of moral integrity. Social pressure and conformity can also override personal values, leading to participation in harmful behaviors that one would otherwise condemn. The collective shadow, in effect, erodes personal responsibility, creating a diffusion of accountability that allows individuals to abdicate their moral compass and participate in collective acts of violence or oppression. Even well-intentioned people can find themselves swept up in the tide of collective shadow, as seen in the Milgram experiment, where participants were willing to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to others simply because they were instructed to do so by an authority figure. Examples of how the collective shadow can be observed abound in various social and political phenomena, such as witch hunts, genocides, and mass hysteria. These events are often fueled by fear, scapegoating, and the projection of disowned qualities onto marginalized groups. The demonization of the other serves to unify the in-group and justify violence, as seen in the Rwandan genocide, where the Tutsi minority was systematically dehumanized and targeted for extermination. Groups project the shadow onto anyone they perceive as a threat to their identity or their values, whether it be immigrants, political opponents, or religious minorities. This projection allows the group to externalize its own disowned qualities, creating a sense of moral superiority and justifying acts of aggression. The collective shadow is thus a potent force that can lead to unspeakable horrors when left unchecked. If the collective shadow has such a pervasive and destructive influence, then how can we begin to address it and create a more just and compassionate society? Collective shadow work requires conscious awareness, critical self-reflection, and courageous action. It requires challenging dominant narratives, promoting empathy, and fostering dialogue across differences. It requires, above all, a willingness to confront the darkness within ourselves and within our society, to acknowledge the uncomfortable truths that we often prefer to ignore. But are these just concepts, or are they applicable in real life? We can look at how the collective shadow manifests in a few examples. To see these dynamics in action, let us examine some case studies of historical and contemporary events, which can illustrate just how potent the collective shadow can be. The rise of Nazi Germany serves as a prime example of a society consumed by its collective shadow. The Nazi regime expertly exploited pre-existing prejudices, resentments, and fears to create a climate of hatred and violence, using propaganda, censorship, and indoctrination to suppress dissent and enforce conformity. The Holocaust, the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews, was a horrific manifestation of the collective shadow's destructive potential, fueled by dehumanization, scapegoating, and a complete abdication of moral responsibility. The concentration camps and the gas chambers stand as a stark reminder of the depth to which humanity can sink when the collective shadow is unleashed. The Rwandan genocide offers another tragic example of collective shadow unleashed. The historical context of ethnic tensions and political instability paved the way for the genocide, with hate speech, propaganda, and the dehumanization of the Tutsi minority inciting mass violence. Ordinary citizens participated in the genocide, demonstrating the power of the collective shadow to override individual morality. Neighbors turned on neighbors, friends betrayed friends, and family members murdered family members, all in the name of ethnic purity. The Rwandan genocide serves as a chilling reminder that the collective shadow is not just an abstract concept, but a real and present danger that can lead to unimaginable atrocities. Consider, as well, a modern political movement. Many of these groups project the shadow onto the other political party, seeing them as evil, corrupt, or misguided. Often, the unacknowledged shadow qualities of the group include authoritarian tendencies, a disregard for facts, or a willingness to demonize opponents. These modern movements are, in ways, similar to historical examples of unchecked collective shadows. But what about today? The collective shadow is not limited to extreme cases of violence and oppression. It is present in more subtle forms in everyday life, manifesting in cultural biases, social inequalities, and environmental degradation. It is essential to remain vigilant and challenge these manifestations whenever they arise, to speak out against injustice, to promote empathy and understanding, and to hold ourselves and others accountable for our actions. We've seen that the collective shadow is always with us, lurking beneath the surface of society, ready to erupt when triggered by fear, resentment, or prejudice. But how can we move forward? By acknowledging its pervasive influence, and by taking conscious steps to address it, both individually and collectively. If darkness exists within the individual and societal structures, how can we best allow light to shine through? Addressing the collective shadow requires individuals to first confront their own personal shadow qualities. By integrating our disowned aspects, we become less susceptible to manipulation and more capable of acting with integrity. Darkness exists within the individual and societal structures to allow light to shine through. With this in mind, we can transition to explore the specific strategies for addressing the collective shadow. Promoting critical thinking, fostering empathy, and challenging dominant narratives can bring forth a more just and compassionate society. We can tease the discussion of specific techniques for promoting social justice, environmental sustainability, and global peace. Collective shadow work requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to engage in difficult conversations. By embracing our sacred darkness, both individually and collectively, we can create a more just and compassionate world. The journey towards wholeness requires courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront our deepest fears. But if we are going to succeed, what specific steps can we take? If integrating our personal shadow makes us less susceptible to the manipulation of the collective shadow, then what does that integration enable us to do? Conscious action, the deliberate choices we make in alignment with our values, becomes a potent force for change. It is the bridge between personal shadow work and addressing the collective shadow, connecting individual healing with societal transformation. Conscious action, however, isn't simply about feeling good. It requires self-awareness, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge the status quo, all of which are fortified by integrating the personal shadow. Consider, for instance, a person who has acknowledged their own tendencies toward judgmentalism. This self-awareness makes them more attuned to systemic injustices and less likely to perpetuate harmful stereotypes. Acknowledging one's own biases and prejudices allows a clearer view of manipulation techniques when issues of injustice arise. Furthermore, someone who has embraced their vulnerability and capacity for compassion will be better equipped to connect with others on a deeper level, fostering empathy and understanding across divides. Integration of the shadow is what allows us to better see manipulation, because the shadow elements of others are less likely to blind us. We can see more clearly when we recognize that darkness exists within us as well. What sort of conscious actions might an individual take to address the collective shadow? Supporting ethical businesses, advocating for social justice causes, and engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views are all powerful options. Seemingly small actions, when multiplied across a community, can have a ripple effect, contributing to larger societal change. Think of a consumer who chooses to buy fair trade coffee, knowing that their purchase supports sustainable farming practices and fair wages for workers. Or consider an individual who volunteers their time at a local homeless shelter, offering compassion and support to those in need. Even choosing to have respectful discussion with an opposing political party member is a form of positive action. To take ethical action, even if unpopular, is a sure way to change the world, if only a little bit. If conscious action is so vital for transforming the collective shadow, then what specific skills and practices can we cultivate to become more effective agents of change? Critical thinking, media literacy, and empathy are all essential tools for navigating the complex landscape of information and resisting manipulation. The next step, then, is to explore these skills in greater detail, to understand how they can help us to disarm propaganda, foster understanding, and promote social justice. But are these easily attained, and can they be taught? Or do they require inherent gifts that many lack? Critical thinking and media literacy are not innate gifts, but rather essential tools that can be cultivated to navigate the complex information landscape and resist manipulation by the collective shadow. Critical thinking can be defined as the ability to analyze information objectively, identify biases, and form well-reasoned judgments. Media literacy, meanwhile, is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, and create media in a variety of forms. These skills are more important than ever, particularly in an age of information overload and rampant misinformation. But just how much influence can these skills have in discerning truth from falsehood, and what happens when people simply choose to believe what they want to believe? Critical thinking and media literacy can help us to identify propaganda, misinformation, and false narratives that perpetuate harmful stereotypes and divisions. Propaganda often relies on emotional appeals, scapegoating, and the distortion of facts to manipulate public opinion. Media literacy can help us to deconstruct media messages and identify underlying agendas, allowing us to see through the smoke and mirrors and arrive at a more informed understanding of the world. Consider, for example, a news article that uses inflammatory language and biased sources to demonize a particular group of people. A media-literate reader will be able to recognize these techniques and question the article's objectivity, seeking out alternative perspectives and verifying information from multiple sources. However, even with these skills, the collective shadow can make it very difficult to see the truth. For an example of modern media manipulation, we can look at any number of online news sources. Many such sources rely on the clickbait model, using sensational headlines and emotionally charged language to attract readers. They may also promote conspiracy theories or spread misinformation, often with the intent of polarizing the public and undermining trust in institutions. A critical thinker would be able to recognize these tactics and approach the information with skepticism, verifying claims and seeking out reliable sources of information. But how easy is it to be a critical thinker, especially when under pressure? If critical thinking and media literacy are so crucial for resisting the collective shadow, then how can we foster these skills in ourselves and others, particularly in a world of increasing polarization and misinformation? Questioning assumptions, seeking out diverse perspectives, and verifying information from multiple sources are all essential practices. It is also important to be aware of our own biases and cognitive distortions, as these can cloud our judgment and make us more susceptible to manipulation. Education, dialogue, and community engagement all play a vital role in fostering critical thinking and media literacy skills. But are these enough to counteract the powerful forces of the collective shadow, or are there other qualities that are equally important? Empathy and compassion are not merely desirable traits, but rather essential qualities for bridging divides, fostering social justice, and healing the wounds of the collective shadow. Empathy can be defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, while compassion is concern for the suffering of others. These qualities are not weaknesses, but rather strengths that enable us to connect with others, challenge our prejudices, and promote understanding across divides. But what if the suffering is caused by someone we consider evil or someone who has caused us harm? Is it still possible, or even desirable, to cultivate empathy and compassion in such circumstances? Empathy and compassion can help us to connect with those who are different from us, challenge our prejudices, and promote understanding across divides. Active listening, perspective-taking, and seeking out diverse experiences are all important practices. Empathy can help us to recognize the humanity in those who have been marginalized or demonized, allowing us to see them as individuals with their own stories and struggles. It is a practice in shadow integration to be compassionate, even to those who seem evil, which creates an ability to understand the source of such action or empathize with the darkness that drives them. But can such an exercise be dangerous? Empathy has been used to promote social justice and reconciliation in various historical and cultural contexts. The Civil Rights Movement, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, and other movements for social change have all relied on empathy to bridge divides and foster healing. By acknowledging historical injustices and creating spaces for dialogue, empathy can help us to move towards a more just and equitable society. Consider the work of Nelson Mandela, who, after spending 27 years in prison for his opposition to apartheid, emerged as a champion of reconciliation and forgiveness. His ability to empathize with his former oppressors was instrumental in creating a peaceful transition to democracy in South Africa. The positive effects of compassion and empathy can be observed in various social and political movements throughout history. But how can we cultivate these qualities in ourselves and others, particularly in a world of increasing conflict and division? If empathy and compassion are so essential for healing the collective shadow, then how can we cultivate these qualities in ourselves and others, particularly in a world of increasing conflict and division? Mindfulness, meditation, and compassionate action are all powerful tools for cultivating empathy and compassion. By practicing mindfulness, we can become more aware of our own thoughts and emotions, allowing us to respond to others with greater understanding and kindness. Through meditation, we can cultivate a sense of inner peace and equanimity, enabling us to remain grounded and compassionate even in the face of adversity. The next step, then, is to synthesize all of this information, to understand how conscious action, critical thinking, and empathy work together to address the collective shadow. But are these techniques enough to truly heal the wounds of the collective shadow, or is there something more that is needed? Conscious action requires critical thinking to identify injustices and make informed choices, while critical thinking is informed by empathy, which allows us to understand the experiences and perspectives of others. These three elements are interconnected, each supporting and reinforcing the others. Light and darkness exist within action, thought, and feeling, and only by embracing both can we achieve true wholeness. As we move towards the conclusion of this exploration, let us remember the transformative potential of embracing our sacred darkness, both individually and collectively. However, the journey towards wholeness requires courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront our deepest fears, and it is not a one-time event, but rather an ongoing process. The techniques we have discussed must be repeated, refined, and adapted to our ever-changing circumstances. If one finds themselves not acting, thinking, or feeling in ethical ways, it is imperative to find and integrate whatever darkness is driving those actions. If the integration of our personal shadow makes us less susceptible to the manipulation of the collective shadow, what then is the next step in this process? It's a deliberate descent, a journey into the depths of our own psyche to reclaim the dark night of the soul, and it begins with self-awareness and shadow integration. But it's not for the faint of heart. Taking conscious action in the face of the collective shadow can feel like an uphill battle, fraught with obstacles and resistance. Meaningful change requires inner resilience, and outward action without inner clarity can be ineffective or even counterproductive. Thus, we transition from societal transformation to individual psychological work, a harrowing journey to the center that requires traversing the shadow. Carl Jung offered a profound perspective on what he termed the dark night of the soul. He presented it not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough, reframing a potentially negative experience as a catalyst for growth. But what does this mean in practical terms? The dark night is a period of intense psychological and spiritual crisis, where old beliefs and identities are shattered, much like a building being demolished to make way for a new structure. It is a necessary stage in the individuation process, leading to a more authentic and integrated self, a phoenix rising from the ashes of the old. For Jung, this was not a pleasant experience, but it was a necessary one. The dark night of the soul is inextricably linked to shadow work, often involving confronting and integrating disowned aspects of the self. But how do these seemingly separate concepts intertwine? The dark night can trigger the emergence of shadow qualities, forcing us to confront our hidden fears, desires, and traumas. This confrontation is essential for breaking free from limiting patterns and achieving psychological wholeness. In fact, the emergence of the shadow, while often painful, is actually a positive process, a sign that the psyche is striving for balance and integration. We all have a natural inclination toward health, and confrontation with the darkness is often what's needed. If the dark night of the soul is a necessary part of individuation, how does one prepare and consciously enter the descent? Is it something to be feared or embraced? Deliberate engagement with the shadow can transform the dark night from a chaotic experience into a purposeful journey. Intention, self-compassion, and a willingness to embrace the unknown are paramount. As we delve deeper, we will explore the mechanics of the dark night, stripping away the fear and unveiling its transformative potential. Can one choose the sacred darkness of the soul? The dark night of the soul can be understood as a symbolic death, a necessary stripping away of old identities and attachments to make way for new growth. But what exactly dies during this process? The ego, our conscious sense of self, must die in order for the self, the totality of our being, to emerge. This symbolic death can feel like a loss of control, meaning, and purpose, akin to wandering in a dark forest without a map or compass. It is the death of the false self, making way for the authentic self. We must accept this, but should not embrace it too tightly. This concept resonates deeply with mythological and religious traditions, highlighting its universality as a transformative archetype. But what examples illuminate this transformative power? Consider the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld, a Sumerian myth where the goddess confronts her shadow sister, Ereshkigal, and undergoes initiation. Or consider the crucifixion of Jesus, a symbolic death and resurrection, representing spiritual transformation and the triumph of the spirit over the flesh. And let us not forget the Buddhist concept of emptiness, shunyata, a necessary step towards enlightenment, a recognition that all things are impermanent and devoid of inherent self. St. John of the Cross, a 16th century Spanish mystic, offers invaluable insights into the dark night of the soul. But what did he specifically say about this experience? He described the dark night as a period of spiritual purification, where the soul is stripped of its attachments and illusions. His emphasis on detachment, surrender, and the importance of trusting in the divine process provides a historical framework for understanding this sentences. St. John writes, "In the dark night, the soul goes out, stripped of all its possessions, to seek its beloved." This underscores the necessity of letting go of our attachments in order to find true fulfillment. If the dark night of the soul is a universal experience, why do so few people seem to understand or embrace it? And how can we reclaim its transformative potential in our modern world? Our culture's aversion to darkness and suffering has led to a misunderstanding and avoidance of this essential process, resulting in an abundance of shallow happiness. But this is a mistake. We must reframe the dark night as a sacred and necessary part of the journey towards wholeness, and we must embrace it. Is modern culture afraid of the dark? Jung's case studies provide compelling examples of the dark night of the soul, illustrating the psychological dynamics and transformative outcomes, grounding the concept in real-world experience. But what do these experiences look like in practice? Consider individuals who underwent periods of intense psychological crisis, grappling with depression, anxiety, and a loss of meaning, and emerged with greater self-awareness and authenticity. Analyze how these individuals confronted their shadow qualities, integrated their disowned aspects, and achieved a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. For example, one of Jung's patients, a successful businessman, experienced a profound crisis in his midlife, questioning his values and his accomplishments. Through analysis, he realized that he had been living a life based on external expectations, neglecting his own inner needs and desires. Confronting his shadow, he was able to embrace his creativity, passion, and spirituality. And he quit his soul-sucking job. Beyond Jung's case studies, the dark night experiences of famous historical figures can also offer valuable insights, connecting the concept to creativity and innovation. But which figures have plumbed these depths? Consider artists who faced periods of intense creative block and self-doubt, but ultimately produced their most powerful works after breaking through, like Beethoven, who composed some of his most transcendent music while struggling with deafness. Consider religious leaders who questioned their faith and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose and vision, such as Martin Luther, whose spiritual crisis led to the Protestant Reformation. Their ability to confront and integrate their inner darkness was essential to their creative breakthroughs. Modern examples also exist. Consider Kanye West, who seems to publicly go through various cycles of mania and depression. His shadow is on full display. He has lost sponsorships, alienated fans, and made shocking claims. It remains to be seen if he is actually going through a dark night of the soul, or if it's simply destruction for destruction's sake. Dark night does not always lead to rebirth. Sometimes it ends in destruction. This highlights a risk in the dark night. These examples underscore how the shadow can be embraced, even in its most challenging forms. But how do we move towards this embrace? The journey towards wholeness requires vulnerability, self-compassion, and a willingness to confront our deepest fears, all of which can be facilitated through techniques like active imagination, dream work, and other Jungian methods. In essence, the dark night of the soul leads to the sacred light of self, and it is awaiting us. In essence, the dark night of the soul is a necessary process for shedding old identities, confronting the shadow, and embracing authenticity. We have explored examples from mythology, religion, psychology, and modern times, each illuminating the transformative potential of this experience. The dark night is just the next step on the journey to wholeness, but how can we navigate it with intention and grace? A deliberate and ongoing process is needed, not a one-time event. Experimentation with the techniques discussed, such as active imagination and dream work, is encouraged. Further education and self-reflection are invaluable tools for navigating the complexities of the psyche. The dark night is just the next step on the journey to wholeness, but where do we go from here? As we transition to the next section, we will explore specific strategies for navigating the dark night and avoiding common pitfalls, creating anticipation, and setting the stage for practical application. Self-compassion, mindfulness, and seeking support from trusted sources will be key themes. We will also discuss specific techniques for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and emerging with a stronger sense of self. But first, we need to learn the techniques. The transformative potential of embracing sacred darkness cannot be overstated. Shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. By embracing our inner darkness, we can create a more just and compassionate world, one individual at a time. The clock is ticking to embrace the dark night of the soul. Is it time for you to take the plunge? The dark night of the soul is a necessary process, but must we passively succumb to this fate? Or can we consciously choose the descent, intentionally stepping into the shadows to accelerate our growth? Deliberate engagement with the shadow requires courage, self-compassion, and a willingness to embrace the unknown, but it can transform a chaotic experience into a purposeful journey. The clock is ticking to embrace the dark night of the soul, and conscious intent can speed up the process. Choosing to confront the shadow empowers the individual and accelerates growth, but how do we begin? Rituals provide a safe and structured space for encountering the shadow. Setting clear intentions provides focus and direction for the journey, transforming vague unease into a directed quest. For example, one might create a ritual space with candles, incense, and symbols representing the shadow, such as images of mythical demons or personal representations of fear. Within this space, one can meditate on specific intentions, such as, I intend to understand my anger, or I intend to reclaim my disowned creativity. This ritualistic approach provides containment for shadow work, preventing the individual from being overwhelmed by unconscious forces, and is akin to a scientist creating a controlled experiment. It is a recognition that, outside of conscious intent, shadow qualities can run rampant. Without the proper respect, the ego can be overcome. Confronting the shadow can be frightening and challenging, but approaching shadow work with kindness and understanding is paramount. Self-compassion allows us to acknowledge our imperfections and accept our shadow qualities without judgment, but this takes courage. Recognizing that shadow integration is not about eliminating darkness, but about understanding and integrating it into a more complete sense of self, can reframe the shadow experience. Jung writes, "Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be." Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The more we embrace the journey with open arms, the more control we have over the process. This courage will affect all other areas of life, allowing us to make better decisions, form better relationships, and ultimately live a more authentic life. But how can we distinguish between a genuine call to deliberate dissent and simply succumbing to negative emotions or destructive impulses? How can we know we are embracing the sacred darkness of the soul and not simply indulging in darkness for its own sake? Guidance from a qualified therapist or spiritual mentor can be invaluable, providing a safe and objective space to explore the shadow, and is far superior to wandering into the darkness with no guidance. Developing discernment and trusting one's intuition is also crucial, learning to distinguish between genuine insights and self-deceptive rationalizations. The key lies in intention. Are we seeking to understand and integrate the shadow, or are we simply indulging in its destructive impulses? This leads us to the concept of symbolic death, a necessary stage in shadow integration, a profound and often unsettling transformation that marks a turning point in the journey toward wholeness. But what dies, and why is this death so crucial for rebirth? Symbolic death involves relinquishing old identities, beliefs, and attachments that no longer serve us. It is the shedding of the old self, the dismantling of the ego's carefully constructed defenses. This process can feel like a loss of control, meaning, and purpose as the familiar structures of our lives crumble around us. One might lose their job, their relationship, their sense of self-worth, all at once, and be left feeling adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The rug has been pulled from under them, and they no longer know who they are or where they are going. But this loss is necessary, much like the pupa stage is necessary for a caterpillar to become a butterfly. The caterpillar must dissolve into a formless goo before it can transform into a winged creature, just as the old self must dissolve before a more authentic and integrated self can emerge. This symbolic death mirrors that of the mythological underworld and has a corresponding psychological effect. But how? Just as seeds must be buried in the darkness of the earth before they can sprout and grow, so too must we descend into the darkness of our own psyche to unearth our hidden potential. The ancient Egyptians believed that the sun god Ra had to travel through the underworld each night to be reborn each morning, and this rebirth depended on death. Our bodies are made up of the chemical compounds from dying stars, reminding us that all life is cyclical, and that death is an integral part of the process. But time is of the essence, for all light must eventually fade, and the time to embrace the underworld is now. Without the darkness, there would be no light, and without integrating the symbolic darkness, our potential cannot be actualized. Embracing symbolic death opens the door to rebirth and renewal. By letting go of the old self, we create space for the emergence of a more authentic and integrated self. This process can lead to increased creativity, resilience, and a deeper sense of meaning, all born from the ashes of what was lost. Consider someone who loses their job, but uses that as an opportunity to pursue their passion, ultimately finding more fulfillment in their new career. The pain of death leads to a renewed appreciation for life, a deeper understanding of our values, and a greater capacity for love and compassion. But how can we cultivate the courage and willingness to embrace symbolic death and allow the old self to dissolve? Is it possible to actively court this dissolution? Surrender, acceptance, and trusting in the process are crucial. It requires a willingness to let go of control and embrace uncertainty, knowing that something new and better will emerge. Mindfulness, meditation, and other spiritual practices can help us cultivate this sense of surrender. By observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment, we can loosen our grip on the ego and allow the process of transformation to unfold. This allows us to be present in the moment. But where can we find examples of this symbolic death? The myth of Orpheus offers a powerful metaphor for shadow integration, and is just one of many examples of how to reclaim lost aspects of the self. But how does his journey illuminate the process of individuation? Orpheus, the legendary musician and poet, descended into the underworld to retrieve his beloved Eurydice from the realm of Hades, and his journey is a powerful symbol of the descent into the unconscious, the confrontation with the shadow, and the attempt to reclaim lost aspects of the self. Eurydice represents the anima, or the feminine aspect of the male psyche, which is often associated with creativity, intuition, and emotionality. Her death symbolizes the loss of these qualities, and Orpheus's journey represents the conscious effort to reclaim them. This descent is fraught with danger, and Orpheus must navigate treacherous landscapes and confront terrifying creatures, all of which represent the challenges and obstacles of shadow work. Orpheus's failure to bring Eurydice back, due to his lack of trust, serves as a stark reminder of the challenges and pitfalls of shadow work. Despite his efforts, Orpheus looks back at Eurydice before they have both fully emerged from the underworld, causing her to vanish forever. This act symbolizes the ego's inability to fully trust the unconscious, leading to the loss of the integrated self. Jung writes, "The shadow is a living part of the personality, and therefore wants to live with it in some form. It cannot be argued out of existence or suppressed into unconsciousness." Orpheus's journey represents the conscious effort to confront and reclaim disowned aspects of the self, and his music symbolizes the power of creative expression to heal and transform the psyche, but this does not always equate to success. Even in failure, Orpheus grew as an individual, learning valuable lessons about trust, patience, and the limitations of the ego, becoming a more complete individual. But can this concept be applied to modern life? Consider an artist who underwent a period of intense self-doubt and creative block, but ultimately produced their most profound work after confronting their shadow. The artist, initially praised for their light-hearted and whimsical style, found themselves increasingly drawn to darker themes, yet was afraid to alienate their audience. Struggling with self-criticism, perfectionism, and fear of failure, the artist was ultimately stifling their creative flow. They used shadow work techniques, such as journaling, dream analysis, and active imagination, to explore their disowned qualities, and realized they were suppressing their anger, pain, and vulnerability. By embracing these darker aspects of their psyche, the artist was able to break through their creative block and produce a series of paintings that were both raw and deeply moving, connecting with audiences on a far deeper level and allowing their true self to shine through. Sometimes a piece of art is not commercially successful. Why is that? Even perceived failure is required, for failures allow us to create better plans and goals and ultimately lead to growth. We are closer to death at every moment, and this awareness can fuel our creative expression, just as it fueled Beethoven's most transcendent music. Whether one succeeds or fails, the attempt to integrate the shadow is always a worthwhile endeavor, leading to improvements in their self-esteem and overall well-being, and a greater understanding of themselves and the world around them. Even failure allows us to improve and embrace shadow elements in our persona. We have discussed the deliberate descent, symbolic death, and the transformative power of shadow integration, but what does this mean for us as individuals? How can we synthesize these concepts into a practical framework for personal growth? The journey into the shadow is not a sign of weakness, but an act of courage and self-love. By consciously choosing to confront our darkness, we can unlock our hidden potential and create a more authentic and fulfilling life. The techniques discussed are all related and build upon each other, and provide a roadmap for navigating the complexities of the human psyche. These techniques must be repeated in a deliberate and ongoing process. Experimentation with active imagination, dream work, and other Jungian methods is essential for finding what resonates with each individual. Further education is the most ethical route to take, ensuring that shadow work is approached with knowledge and understanding. The techniques discussed must be repeated, for the shadow is not a one-time fix, but a lifelong journey. This ensures we are constantly growing and developing. As we transition to the next section, we will explore practical techniques for navigating the deliberate descent, emphasizing the importance of self-compassion and mindful awareness, creating anticipation for practical application. Self-care, boundaries, and seeking support from trusted sources will be key themes, along with specific techniques for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and emerging with a stronger sense of self. But what is the ultimate goal of this journey? The transformative potential of embracing sacred darkness leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. By embracing our inner darkness, we can create a more just and compassionate world, one individual at a time. The clock is ticking to integrate the shadow and become a more complete version of ourselves. What is holding you back from taking the plunge? Self-compassion and mindfulness are not merely buzzwords. They are the bedrock upon which successful shadow work is built. Navigating the often turbulent waters of the unconscious requires a steady hand and an open heart, which is only accessible through a dedication to compassion and mindful awareness. Without these qualities, the descent into the shadow becomes a perilous journey fraught with self-criticism, fear, and resistance, preventing the individual from integrating key shadow elements. The question then becomes, how can we cultivate these essential qualities? Self-compassion, at its core, involves treating oneself with kindness, understanding, and acceptance, especially during difficult times. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, acknowledging our imperfections, and offering ourselves the same care and support we would give to a loved one. Mindfulness, on the other hand, is the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment, allowing us to observe our thoughts and feelings without getting carried away by them. It provides a space for objectivity, which is required for analyzing shadow qualities. These qualities are not innate. They are skills that can be developed and strengthened through consistent practice, requiring rigorous dedication. It is a discipline that must be honed. Self-compassion allows us to approach the shadow with curiosity and acceptance, rather than fear and judgment, acting as a soothing balm. Self-criticism and shame are potent obstacles that hinder shadow work, creating resistance and defensiveness, making the process nearly impossible. How can one look inward if one is constantly being barraged by negativity? By embracing self-compassion, we can acknowledge our imperfections and vulnerabilities without getting stuck in negativity, and recognize that these shadow qualities are simply a part of the human experience, not defining characteristics. One must embrace their whole self, as opposed to fixating on shadow qualities. Embracing the wholeness of one's being is the first step on the path to individuation. One might engage in loving kindness meditation, directing feelings of warmth and compassion towards oneself and others, or engage in self-soothing activities that bring comfort and relaxation, such as spending time in nature, listening to music, or taking a warm bath. Reframing negative self-talk is also essential, challenging critical thoughts and replacing them with more balanced and compassionate ones. For instance, instead of thinking, "I'm such a failure," one might reframe it as, "I made a mistake, but I can learn from it." It is also critical to set boundaries, practice self-care, and seek support from trusted sources, creating a safe space in the mind for shadow work, because it is work. Setting aside a specific time and place for reflection, free from distractions and interruptions, will allow the individual to fully embrace the journey. But if self-compassion and mindful awareness are so essential for successful shadow work, How can we ensure that we're not simply using them to avoid confronting difficult truths or indulging in self-pity? The journey into the shadow requires courage and honesty. So, how can we avoid using self-compassion as a shield? Discernment and accountability are critical, so one must seek feedback from trusted sources and stay committed to personal growth. This process is analogous to a scientist carefully calibrating equipment before conducting an experiment, ensuring accuracy and objectivity. Only with careful preparation can one truly map the terrain of the shadow, allowing the individual to prepare for the descent. To navigate the shadow realm, one must embrace the concept of archetypes and symbolic language, which provides structure and meaning to an otherwise chaotic experience. These archetypes act as a map, delineating the path forward. Archetypes, as Jung described, are universal patterns of behavior, imagery, and motivation that reside in the collective unconscious, acting as the building blocks of the human psyche. Jung writes, "These primordial images are, of course, the psychic residue of numberless experiences of the same type. They have undergone a process of condensation, resulting in typical forms. They are the blueprints of the human experience, passed down through generations, informing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, whether we are consciously aware of them or not. These archetypes serve as guideposts, helping us to understand the different aspects of our shadow and the challenges we may encounter along the way. But how do we interpret these guideposts? It must be emphasized that archetypes are symbolic, not literal, and require interpretation, meaning they cannot be taken at face value. For example, the archetype of the monster may not represent a literal monster, but rather a repressed fear, a disowned quality, or a destructive pattern of behavior, showing that these symbols are constantly at play in daily life. The key is to look beyond the surface and explore the deeper meaning and significance of these symbolic representations. It's like learning to read a map, understanding the symbols and landmarks that guide you to your destination, allowing the individual to better assess their reality. One might also look to mythology, folklore, and dreams, which all provide symbolic representations of the shadow and the descent process. Myths and fairy tales often feature shadow figures, such as monsters, villains, and tricksters, who embody disowned aspects of the human psyche. These figures represent the qualities that we reject, fear, or deny in ourselves, acting as mirrors reflecting back our own hidden potential for darkness. But where else can we find these reflections? Dreams offer personal and symbolic insights into our shadow qualities and the unconscious forces that drive our behavior, acting as a direct line to the unconscious, bypassing the censorship of the ego. These traditional stories teach us about the human condition and that archetypes are constantly at play. There are many examples of common archetypes and symbols that can be used to interpret the shadow landscape. The shadow itself acts as a general archetype, representing the disowned aspects of the personality. The trickster embodies chaos, deception, and rebellion. The dragon symbolizes the fearsome and overwhelming power of the unconscious. The underworld represents the realm of the dead, the hidden depths of the psyche, and the anima animus, as shadow elements, represent the repressed feminine or masculine qualities. Each archetype represents a different aspect of the shadow and the challenges associated with integrating it, requiring a delicate dance. It is crucial to remember that these are not mere labels, but rather keys to unlocking deeper understanding. If archetypes and symbols can provide a valuable map for navigating the shadow, how can we avoid getting lost in abstract interpretations or imposing our own biases onto the unconscious material? If the map is not the territory, how can we ensure that we don't mistake one for the other? Grounding our interpretations in personal experience and seeking feedback from others is essential. Intuition and trusting one's inner guidance also plays a role. Trusting in the process will allow the individual to stay on track, but the individual must still take the plunge. To help visualize the utility of these approaches, let's consider the myth of Theseus. Consider the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur as a metaphor for navigating the labyrinth of the shadow and confronting our inner monsters. Theseus, a hero of Greek mythology, ventured into the labyrinth to slay the Minotaur, a creature that was half man and half bull, and who dwelled at the center of the maze, devouring all who entered. The Minotaur, born from an unnatural union, embodies our animalistic and instinctual nature, representing the dark, untamed forces that reside within us all. The labyrinth itself is a symbol of the unconscious, a complex and confusing maze of thoughts, feelings, and memories. Theseus's journey into the labyrinth mirrors our own journey into the shadow, where we must confront our inner demons and navigate the complexities of our own psyche. Ariadne's thread represents the conscious awareness and guidance that helps us to navigate the shadow without getting lost. Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, gave Theseus a bowl of thread to unwind as he entered the labyrinth, allowing him to find his way back out after slaying the Minotaur. This thread symbolizes the importance of self-awareness, mindfulness, and conscious intention in shadow work. Without it, we risk becoming lost in the labyrinth of our own unconscious, overwhelmed by our fears and anxieties. Therefore, we must embrace the thread and cling to it tightly. Theseus's confrontation with the Minotaur is a symbol of the challenges of integrating our shadow qualities. Slaying the Minotaur is not about destroying or eliminating our dark side, but about confronting and integrating it into our conscious awareness. Jung writes, "To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light." Once one has experienced a few times what it is like to stand judgingly between the opposites and make a decision as to what is right or wrong, one begins to understand what is meant by the self. It is about acknowledging and accepting all aspects of ourselves, both good and bad, light and dark, for it is only through integration that we can achieve wholeness. Without the thread, however, Theseus would not have found his way back. Consider the experience of a modern individual navigating their own shadow labyrinth, emphasizing the importance of self-awareness and mindful attention to the symbolic threads that emerge. This individual, initially plagued by anxiety, self-doubt, and a sense of being lost or disconnected, felt as though they were trapped in a maze with no escape. They began to pay attention to their dreams, synchronicities, and intuitive insights, which served as Ariadne's thread, guiding them deeper into their unconscious. They began to journal and map out their shadow qualities, assigning symbolic language to each element. This led to catharsis, which in turn led to creative endeavors and increased mindfulness, creating a virtuous cycle. The individual realized that even perceived failure is required, for failures allow us to create better plans and goals. We are closer to death at every moment, and this awareness can fuel our determination, which ultimately improves their self-esteem and overall well-being. It is through embracing our imperfections, vulnerabilities, and fears that we can unlock our true potential and live a more authentic and fulfilling life. But the individual must repeat this process. Mapping shadow qualities to symbolic language led to a transformative experience, illustrating the positive qualities that can come from dissent. It is a path well worth taking. We have discussed self-compassion, mindful awareness, archetypal mapping, and the importance of following the symbolic threads that emerge during shadow work. All of this synthesizes to create a potent picture. The deliberate descent into the shadow is a journey, not a destination, empowering the individual to grow, develop, and overcome their demons. It is not a one-time event, but a continuous process of self-discovery and integration. So what's next? To continue the process, a deliberate and ongoing effort is required. Experimentation with the techniques discussed, such as active imagination, dream work, and other Jungian methods, is essential for finding what resonates with each individual. Further education is the most ethical route, ensuring that shadow work is approached with knowledge and understanding. The techniques discussed must be repeated, for the shadow is not a one-time fix, but a lifelong journey. So is there an end? Not really, for we are constantly changing, and the process must also constantly evolve. As we transition to the next section, we will explore practical techniques for navigating the challenges and pitfalls that may arise during the descent, emphasizing the importance of boundaries, self-care, and seeking support from trusted sources. Setting clear intentions, maintaining a sense of humor, and trusting in the process will be key. What specific techniques will we discuss? We will delve into specific techniques for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and emerging with a stronger sense of self. But what are the overarching consequences? Embracing sacred darkness is essential for creating a more complete being. The transformative potential of embracing sacred darkness leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. This allows one to embrace all aspects of themselves, leading to the creation of a more just and compassionate world. The time is now, so how can one embrace the journey? By becoming more aware. The journey into the sacred darkness, the exploration of one's shadow self, is not unlike a perilous expedition into uncharted territory. Without the proper safeguards, the explorer risks becoming lost, overwhelmed, or even consumed by the very forces they seek to understand. Boundaries, self-care, and support systems are not merely helpful suggestions. They are the essential equipment needed for safe passage, acting as the shield and oasis without which the journey risks failure. Are these elements truly essential? Boundaries act as a secure perimeter, protecting us from being overwhelmed by the intensity of shadow exploration. They are the walls of the hero's castle that ensure that his or her journey is manageable. Self-care is the oasis in the desert, offering nourishment and restoration throughout the challenging journey. Without it, the individual will fail. Support systems are the fellow travelers offering support, guidance, and perspective. Without their aid, the journey may be doomed. These elements are paramount, even more important than the techniques themselves, for a lone explorer will eventually fail. The techniques of shadow work, such as active imagination, dream analysis, and journaling, are useful only if the practitioner is safe and has support. Without this foundation, these techniques can be actively harmful, akin to giving a novice a scalpel without any training. Previous techniques are analogous to a soldier's sword, potent if wielded correctly, but dangerous if there is no armor. Without boundaries, one can easily become emotionally overwhelmed, re-traumatized, or burned out. Adequate preparation will not completely remove the potential for failure, but it will mitigate it. But where does one turn when preparation isn't enough? One's support system is a failsafe to rely on if preparation proves insufficient and the unexpected occurs. It is like having a skilled medic on hand during a dangerous mission, ready to provide immediate assistance if needed. Consider the analogy of a mountain climber ascending a treacherous peak. They rely not only on their skill and equipment, but also on the support of their team, who can provide guidance, encouragement, and rescue if necessary. The same holds true for shadow work, where a strong support system can make all the difference between success and failure. But if boundaries, self-care, and support systems are so critical for safe shadow work, how do we establish and maintain them effectively, especially when the shadow itself may resist these protective measures? The shadow, fearing exposure and integration, may actively try to sabotage our efforts to create boundaries, self-care routines, and support systems. It may whisper doubts in our ear, tempting us to abandon our protective measures in pursuit of quick results or to avoid uncomfortable feelings. It is like a rebellious child who refuses to wear a seatbelt, believing that it will somehow restrict their freedom. Overcoming this resistance requires self-awareness, assertiveness, and a willingness to confront our own inner demons, even when they try to undermine our efforts. Only with unwavering resolve can we fortify ourselves against the shadow's influence and create a safe space for exploration. What specific actions can we take to develop this resolve? Boundaries, in the context of shadow work, are clear limits that protect our physical, emotional, and mental well-being. They are the fortress walls that keep the shadow from overwhelming our conscious mind, and are essential for preventing overwhelm and maintaining a sense of safety. However, these boundaries are not walls, but rather flexible guidelines that allow us to engage with the shadow in a controlled and intentional way. They are the drawbridge that can be raised or lowered as needed, allowing us to enter the shadow realm while still maintaining our defenses. Different types of boundaries exist, such as time limits, emotional boundaries, and physical boundaries, all of which need to be communicated assertively and consistently. Time limits dictate how long we spend engaging in shadow work activities, preventing us from becoming emotionally exhausted or fixated on negative thoughts. Emotional boundaries involve disidentifying from shadow qualities and practicing self-compassion, reminding us that we are not defined by our darkness. Physical boundaries entail creating a safe and comfortable space for shadow exploration, free from distractions and interruptions. The enforcement of these boundaries is paramount. Establishing and maintaining our boundaries clearly and assertively, even when it feels uncomfortable or goes against our habitual patterns, is paramount. We must learn to recognize when our boundaries are being crossed and respond in a way that is both firm and compassionate. This involves saying no to the shadow's demands when they threaten our well-being and setting clear expectations for how we will engage with our inner darkness, which is like a parent setting rules for a child. This is not about winning a boundary battle, but about protecting our inner peace, acting as a responsible guardian. Specific examples of how to establish and maintain boundaries in different shadow work contexts, such as active imagination, dream analysis, and emotional processing, can be immensely helpful. Setting time limits for shadow work sessions prevents emotional exhaustion, ensuring that we do not become consumed by our inner darkness. Creating emotional boundaries by disidentifying from shadow qualities and practicing self-compassion allows us to observe our inner demons without becoming them. Establishing physical boundaries by creating a safe and comfortable space for shadow exploration provides a sanctuary where we can confront our shadow without fear. But how can we effectively enforce our boundaries when the shadow itself is pushing against them, tempting us to cross the line or abandon our protective measures altogether? The shadow may try to manipulate us into violating our boundaries, using guilt, shame, or fear as leverage, like a cunning salesman who uses psychological tricks to persuade us to buy something we don't need. It may tell us that we are not worthy of self-care, that we are weak if we need support, or that we are selfish if we set limits on our time and energy. Resisting these manipulations requires self-trust, inner authority, and a willingness to say no to the shadow's demands, which is akin to standing up to a bully who tries to intimidate us. Trust your intuition, listen to your inner voice, and remember that you are in control of your own journey. And what role does self-care play in that journey? Self-care, in the context of shadow work, is the intentional practice of nurturing our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. It is the sacred well from which we draw strength and resilience, sustaining us throughout the demanding process of shadow integration. It is the restoration point that allows for the journey to continue. Self-care is not selfish, but rather a necessary act of self-preservation that allows us to engage with the shadow from a place of strength and resilience, enabling a safer return to the ordinary world. Different types of self-care exist, such as physical self-care, exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional self-care, journaling, therapy, creative expression, and spiritual self-care, meditation, nature, ritual. Physical self-care provides us with the energy and vitality we need to confront our inner demons. Emotional self-care allows us to process and integrate difficult emotions without becoming overwhelmed. Spiritual self-care connects us to something larger than ourselves, providing us with a sense of meaning and purpose. It's important to note that each aspect reinforces the other, creating a stronger defense. Without a strong connection to the self, the journey will be extremely treacherous. Identifying and prioritizing our self-care needs, even when it feels difficult or inconvenient, is of utmost importance. We must learn to recognize when we are depleted or overwhelmed and respond in a way that is both nurturing and sustainable. This involves setting aside time for activities that bring us joy and relaxation, seeking support from trusted sources, and practicing self-compassion, which is analogous to refueling a car before a long journey, ensuring that we have enough energy to reach our destination. As these techniques are used, shadow work becomes more sustainable. These techniques need to be employed before, during, and after shadow work, for neglecting these requirements creates a dangerous situation. Creating a calming and supportive environment for shadow exploration ensures that we feel safe and secure as we delve into our inner darkness. Using self-soothing techniques, such as deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, and visualization, helps us to manage difficult emotions as they arise. Engaging in creative expression, such as writing, painting, or music, allows us to process and integrate shadow experiences in a healthy and constructive way. How does one's environment improve shadow work? Consider the case of Sarah, whose self-care practices were critical to her shadow work, as she initially struggled with self-doubt, shame, and a sense of being lost or disconnected. She felt as though she was wandering in a dark forest with no compass or map. By prioritizing her self-care needs, she found the strength and resilience to confront her inner demons and integrate her shadow qualities. As she made the choice to focus on self-care, shadow work became more cathartic, illustrating the transformative impact of shadow integration on self-esteem, relationships, and overall well-being. By taking care of herself, Sarah transformed her inner world, leading to greater self-acceptance, authenticity, and fulfillment. What role can others play in this journey? Support systems, networks of trusted individuals who can provide guidance, encouragement, and perspective during shadow work, are crucial in preventing isolation and promoting resilience, acting as the guide. These support systems can include therapists, mentors, friends, family members, or online communities, and their presence can make all the difference between success and failure. What types of support are useful? Different types of support exist, such as emotional support, practical support, and informational support. Emotional support provides us with a safe space to share our thoughts and feelings without judgment. Practical support offers assistance with tasks and responsibilities, freeing up our time and energy for shadow work. Informational support provides us with valuable insights and resources, helping us to navigate the complexities of our inner landscape. Each element helps to keep the individual focused on the journey. How do we build this network? Seeking out and cultivating supportive relationships with individuals who understand and respect our shadow work journey is crucial. This involves identifying individuals who are capable of providing non-judgmental listening, honest feedback, and compassionate encouragement, those who can offer a safe harbor during a storm. We must also learn to communicate our needs and boundaries clearly to our support system, ensuring that they can provide the type of support we need. Without doing so, one risks the entire process. So, how can support systems specifically assist us? Support systems can assist us in navigating the challenges of shadow work by providing a sounding board for our thoughts and feelings, offering alternative perspectives, and helping us to stay grounded during difficult times. Engaging in group therapy or shadow work circles allows us to share our experiences and learn from others who are on a similar path. Using online communities and forums connects us with like-minded individuals and access valuable resources, creating a sense of belonging and shared purpose. All of these techniques reinforce the importance of community during this often treacherous process. In summary, boundaries, self-care, and support systems are interconnected and play an essential role in creating a safe and sustainable foundation for shadow integration, and it is imperative to create all three. By establishing clear boundaries, prioritizing self-care, and cultivating supportive relationships, we create a safe container for exploring our shadow qualities and unlocking our hidden potential. It is not a one-time event, but a continuous process of self-discovery and integration, one that needs to be constantly maintained, and one that will change as the individual develops. As we continuously grow, our shadow work must evolve with us. But what if challenges arise? Despite our best efforts to create a safe and supportive environment, common pitfalls and challenges may arise during shadow work, emphasizing the importance of self-compassion and resilience in navigating these difficulties. Setbacks, regressions, and moments of doubt are all part of the process, testing our commitment and resolve. It is not a linear path, but rather a winding road with unexpected twists and turns. We must be prepared to face these challenges with courage and perseverance, trusting in our ability to overcome them and emerge stronger on the other side. We must also reiterate the transformative potential of embracing sacred darkness. Shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness, allowing us to embrace all aspects of ourselves, both light and dark. This process allows us to create a more just and compassionate world, for by understanding our own inner demons, we can better understand and empathize with the struggles of others. The time is now to integrate, but why must the individual start this journey? Because only the individual can take these steps. What specific pitfalls may arise? Despite our best efforts to establish boundaries, prioritize self-care, and cultivate supportive relationships, challenges and setbacks inevitably arise during shadow work. Are these stumbles signs of failure, or are they intrinsic to the journey itself, offering valuable opportunities for growth and deeper understanding? Shadow work is not a linear progression. Even with robust boundaries and support, setbacks and regressions are not only possible, but probable. Shadow work can trigger unexpected emotional responses and bring up long-buried traumas, for it is in the exploration of these traumas where one finds the greatest potential for transformation. Setbacks are temporary dips in progress, moments where the journey feels more difficult, while regressions involve reverting to old patterns of behavior, where previous flaws and behaviors are once again prominent. The inevitability of stumbles should be anticipated to ensure it does not halt or deter the person doing shadow work, for it is through perseverance that wholeness is achieved. But what hidden mechanisms within us contribute to these stumbles, and how can we anticipate and navigate them? Our ego, in its attempt to protect us from uncomfortable truths, may deploy shadow defenses, psychological mechanisms that resist shadow integration. These defenses often operate unconsciously, subtly sabotaging our efforts to confront our inner darkness. The ego may resist shadow integration through denial, where unpleasant aspects of ourselves are simply ignored. Rationalization, where we create seemingly logical explanations for our shadow behaviors, or projection, where we attribute our disowned qualities to others. These defenses can manifest as self-sabotage, where we undermine our own progress. Avoidance, where we steer clear of situations that might trigger uncomfortable emotions. Or acting out, where we engage in destructive behaviors as a way of releasing pent-up tension. The resistance created by shadow defenses can be overcome, but only when anticipated, for these defenses are a natural response to the discomfort and vulnerability that shadow work entails. Setbacks and regressions can trigger feelings of shame, guilt, and discouragement, leading to a temptation to abandon shadow work altogether, like a climber giving up on a mountain ascent after a fall. These feelings are a natural part of the process, a consequence of confronting our deepest fears and insecurities. They should not be allowed to derail our progress, but rather be acknowledged and integrated as valuable learning experiences. Self-compassion and resilience are essential in navigating these difficult emotions, allowing us to approach our stumbles with understanding and acceptance, rather than judgment and self-criticism. A support network can reinforce the importance of continuing, providing encouragement and perspective when we are tempted to give up. The reassurance and insight that can only come from another's mind can be a powerful source of inspiration. How can we recognize when we are experiencing a setback or regression? And how can we respond in a way that promotes growth and integration, rather than further entrenching our shadow defenses? Self-awareness, mindfulness, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes are critical, allowing us to identify patterns of behavior that may be hindering our progress. Guidance from a qualified therapist or spiritual mentor can provide valuable insights and support, helping us to navigate the complexities of our inner landscape. By cultivating these qualities, we can transform our stumbles into stepping stones, paving the way for deeper self-discovery and wholeness. Yet, even with these tools, we may encounter specific pitfalls and resistance patterns that require further attention. During shadow work, there are specific pitfalls that one will encounter. It is helpful to recognize these familiar themes. The honeymoon phase, where initial progress feels exhilarating and transformative, can be followed by a crash, where the shadow reasserts itself with renewed force, creating a sense of disillusionment. Over-identification with shadow qualities, where we become consumed by our darkness, can lead to a distorted sense of self and a loss of balance. Idealizing the shadow, where we romanticize darkness, can lead to a dangerous embrace of destructive behaviors. These pitfalls can derail our progress and undermine our efforts to integrate our shadow. Common resistance patterns may emerge, often unconsciously attempting to avoid the difficult and uncomfortable work of confronting our inner darkness. Intellectualization, where we analyze the shadow without feeling it, can create a false sense of progress, masking underlying emotional avoidance. Spiritual bypassing, where we use spiritual concepts to avoid difficult emotions, can prevent genuine integration and lead to a superficial understanding of ourselves. Comparing one's progress to others can breed envy, discouragement, and a sense of inadequacy, undermining our self-compassion and resilience. Transference and countertransference are powerful dynamics that can arise, especially when working with a therapist or mentor. Transference is the unconscious redirection of feelings from one person to another, often based on past relationships. In the context of shadow work, we may project our shadow qualities onto our therapist or mentor, seeing them as embodying our disowned aspects. Countertransference is the therapist's or mentor's emotional response to the client, which can also be influenced by their own shadow qualities. These dynamics can complicate the therapeutic process, potentially hindering progress or even causing harm. The importance of a qualified professional cannot be overstated, as they can recognize and navigate these complex interactions, ensuring a safe and productive therapeutic experience. How can we become more aware of these pitfalls and resistance patterns, and how can we develop strategies for navigating them effectively, both on our own and with the help of a qualified therapist or mentor? Self-reflection, journaling, and seeking feedback from trusted sources can provide valuable insights into our blind spots and unconscious patterns. Setting realistic expectations, practicing patience, and celebrating small victories can help us to maintain motivation and prevent discouragement. These practices help to manage expectations, which is the first step in mitigating disappointments. But what happens when, despite our best efforts, we still find ourselves failing to make progress or even regressing? The myth of Sisyphus, condemned to endlessly push a boulder uphill only to have it roll back down, serves as a powerful metaphor for the repetitive and often frustrating nature of shadow work. Like Sisyphus, we may find ourselves confronting the same challenges and patterns repeatedly, feeling as though we are making no progress. This cyclical nature of shadow integration can be disheartening, leading to feelings of hopelessness and resignation. Yet, Sisyphus's ability to continue, despite the apparent futility of his task, embodies the importance of perseverance and self-acceptance, reminding us that the journey itself is the reward. The ability to continue despite impossible odds or no perceived positive feedback may be the most important part of Sisyphus's message. Consider the experience of a historical figure who faced significant setbacks and regressions, in their personal journey of shadow integration. The 19th century psychologist William James, the father of American psychology, battled severe depression and suicidal ideation for years. He was initially overwhelmed by feelings of worthlessness, despair, and a profound sense of meaninglessness, which may have been a result of his shadow overwhelming his sense of self. However, he used shadow work techniques, such as journaling, self-reflection, and philosophical inquiry, to explore his disowned qualities and confront his inner demons. Through this arduous process, James was able to transform his suffering into a source of strength and resilience. He went on to become one of the most influential psychologists of his time, helping countless others to overcome their own mental health challenges, highlighting the transformative impact of shadow integration on self-esteem, relationships, and overall well-being. But what happens when our own ethical shadow integration techniques are not enough? Consider the case study of a modern individual whose boundaries and self-care practices were not enough to prevent shadow intrusion. This individual engaged in ethical shadow integration techniques, seeking guidance from a qualified therapist and practicing mindfulness and self-compassion. However, despite these efforts, the shadow's force was too great, overwhelming their defenses and triggering a period of intense emotional turmoil, making it impossible to continue. This forced the individual to pause shadow work and focus on rebuilding their boundaries, reinforcing the importance of recognizing our limits and prioritizing self-preservation. Sometimes the best course of action is to retreat and regroup rather than continuing to push forward. The need to stop when required, regardless of how much work remains, is paramount. Like a muscle, the mind can be injured if pushed too far, leading to burnout, emotional exhaustion, or even re-traumatization. The desire to push through is a common ego defense, a way of avoiding the vulnerability and uncertainty that comes with acknowledging our limits. A perceived failure is actually a positive step, as it leads to greater self-awareness and a deeper understanding of our own needs and boundaries. This awareness, then, is a success. In essence, the journey into the shadow is not a straight line, but rather a winding path with its share of ups and downs. Setbacks and regressions are not failures, but rather opportunities for growth and deeper understanding. The techniques discussed here all support the previous, building upon our boundaries, self-care practices, and support systems. As such, what remains to be explored are strategies for cultivating self-compassion, resilience, and a growth mindset in the face of shadow challenges. What role does reframing negative experiences, practicing gratitude, and focusing on our strengths play? We will explore specific techniques for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and emerging with a stronger sense of self, even when faced with adversity. By embracing sacred darkness, shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness, for it allows us to embrace all aspects of ourselves, both light and dark. This is how the individual creates a more just and compassionate world, understanding their own inner demons and empathizing with the struggles of others. Now is the time to integrate, for the shadow waits to be integrated, but how do we find the tools? The path to wholeness through shadow work is not without its perils. It is a journey that demands a high degree of ethical consideration, for the depths of the unconscious can harbor forces that, if mishandled, can lead to unforeseen and detrimental consequences. The shadow, as Jung observed, is not merely a repository of disowned qualities, but a potent source of primal energy, including violent, destructive, or harmful impulses that require careful and responsible engagement. It is essential to acknowledge that shadow work can be misused or misinterpreted, leading to negative outcomes, both for oneself and for others. It is not a playground for reckless abandon, but a sacred space that demands reverence and respect. Understanding these elements, as Jung observed, must be integrated ethically, lest we unleash forces we cannot control. Therefore, how can we navigate these murky waters, ensuring that our exploration of the shadow leads to growth and not destruction? A common and dangerous misconception is that shadow work is about unleashing or acting out our shadow impulses, as if embracing our darkness means condoning harmful behavior. Shadow integration is not about giving free rein to our destructive tendencies, but about understanding and transforming the underlying energies that fuel them. Instead of succumbing to these impulses, we must channel them into constructive outlets, such as creative expression, assertive action, or compassionate understanding. As Marie-Louise von Franz writes, the shadow, when realized, is the source of renewal, the source of creative energy. The violent potential within the shadow must be acknowledged, faced, and ultimately constrained, not celebrated, lest we lose ourselves in the darkness. It is not about condoning harmful behavior, but about understanding and transforming the underlying energies. What, then, are the ethical guidelines that can help us navigate this treacherous terrain? Engaging with the shadow requires a rigorous adherence to ethical guidelines, emphasizing intention, consent, and boundaries. In therapeutic or group settings, exploring the shadow demands qualified guidance from a therapist or spiritual mentor who is well versed in ethical considerations. As Jung writes, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. Respecting the boundaries of others is paramount, avoiding projection or manipulation, for the shadow can easily be used as a weapon against those who are vulnerable. The shadow should be approached with respect and caution, not as a toy to be played with, but as a powerful force that can both heal and destroy. As such, if the shadow can contain harmful impulses, how can we ensure that our shadow work does not inadvertently lead to harm, either to ourselves or to others? Self-awareness, humility, and a willingness to seek guidance from trusted sources are essential safeguards, providing a compass to navigate the complexities of the shadow. However, these qualities alone may not be enough to protect us from the potential for manipulation and unethical behavior, especially when individuals with certain personality traits enter the equation. The concept of the dark triad narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy casts a long shadow on the landscape of shadow work, potentially leading to exploitation and harm, because these traits can manifest during shadow work, potentially leading to unethical behavior. Individuals with high levels of dark triad traits may be drawn to shadow work for manipulative or self-serving purposes, seeking to exploit its power for their own gain. They may use shadow work techniques to justify harmful actions, exploit others, or gain power, twisting the language of self-discovery to rationalize their destructive behavior. They may lack empathy, exploit others without remorse, or exhibit a grandiose sense of self-importance. It is essential to recognize these red flags in ourselves and others to prevent abuse and manipulation, lest we become unwitting pawns in their game. It is important to be aware of these signs, as these individuals may be drawn to shadow work for manipulative or self-serving purposes. They may use shadow work techniques to justify harmful actions, exploit others, or gain power. For instance, a narcissist might use shadow work to inflate their ego, believing they have transcended their darkness while remaining blind to their true flaws. Specific examples of how dark triad traits can manifest during shadow work include using shadow work as a means of self-aggrandizement or superiority, believing oneself to be more enlightened or evolved than others, blaming others for one's own shadow qualities, projecting them onto others to avoid taking responsibility for one's own actions. Justifying harmful behavior by claiming it is part of the process or necessary for growth, using the language of shadow work to excuse unethical behavior. It is imperative that ethics plays a role in recognizing and limiting these behaviors, otherwise harm will occur. If something seems wrong, unethical, or immoral, it probably is. Trust your intuition, for it may be a warning sign from your unconscious. These feelings can be related to shadow qualities, alerting us to potential danger. However, doing this analysis can be difficult, as those with dark triad traits are often skilled at manipulation and deception. How can we develop the discernment and ethical framework necessary to navigate these challenges effectively? And how can we protect ourselves and others from harm? Critical thinking, ethical reflection, and a commitment to personal integrity are essential tools, helping us to distinguish between genuine self-discovery and manipulative tactics. Seeking guidance from a qualified therapist or spiritual mentor who is well-versed in ethical considerations can provide invaluable support, helping us to stay grounded and avoid falling prey to unethical influences. Consider, then, the following case studies, which illustrate the ethical and unethical integration of the shadow. Consider the case study of an individual who ethically integrated their shadow. Let's call him Alex. Alex struggled with anger, often lashing out at loved ones and feeling consumed by rage. Recognizing this destructive pattern, Alex sought therapy and began exploring his shadow qualities through journaling, meditation, and creative expression. He uncovered repressed childhood traumas and disowned aspects of himself, gradually integrating these disowned parts into his conscious awareness. Through this process, Alex transformed his anger into a source of assertiveness and passion, learning to express his needs and desires in a healthy and constructive way. The transformative impact of shadow integration on Alex's self-esteem, relationships, and overall well-being was profound, leading to a more fulfilling and authentic life. However, what happens when these techniques are wielded with malicious intent? Contrast Alex's ethical integration with the actions of a modern-day cult leader. Let's call him Marcus. Marcus used shadow work techniques on his followers to justify his actions, manipulating them into believing that their darkest impulses were divine revelations. He encouraged them to act out their shadow qualities, such as greed, lust, and violence, claiming it was necessary for their spiritual growth. The results were devastating, leading to abuse, exploitation, and the destruction of countless lives. Consent was absent, ethical behavior was abandoned, and support was replaced with manipulation and control. What, then, are the key differences between these two cases? The ethical integration is often performed in solitude, or in a one-on-one therapeutic relationship, with support from trusted sources, whereas unethical manipulation is often performed on a group by a single person who has an agenda. Integration, performed on a group by a single person, almost always has negative results, leading to harm and destruction. Marcus used shadow work as a tool for manipulation and control. The difference comes down to a simple choice between ethical and unethical behavior, a choice that has profound consequences. Even perceived failure is required, for it provides valuable learning experiences and allows us to create better plans and goals. Even with ethical intentions, there will be missteps. After all, we are closer to death at every moment, making it impossible to predict the future or plan accordingly. As such, ethical shadow integration can be a complex and challenging process, requiring a commitment to self-awareness, ethical behavior, and responsible action. The information presented about ethical considerations, dark triad traits, and the importance of responsible action in shadow work all point to the same conclusion. The journey into the shadow is not without its risks. Ethical behavior, even if difficult, is the key to lasting growth. Ethics, therefore, is the difference between growth and destruction, between wholeness and fragmentation. What remains is to explore specific strategies for cultivating ethical awareness, responsible action, and a commitment to personal integrity in the context of shadow integration. What role do moral reasoning, empathy, and a willingness to challenge our own biases play in this process? We will explore specific techniques for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and emerging with a stronger sense of self, even when faced with difficult ethical dilemmas. By embracing sacred darkness ethically, we unlock its transformative potential, leading to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. This is how the individual creates a more just and compassionate world, understanding their own inner demons and empathizing with the struggles of others. Now is the time to ethically integrate the shadow, for the world needs more individuals who have embraced their sacred darkness. The exploration of the shadow, as we have seen, often begins with the individual, but its manifestations are perhaps most vividly seen in our interpersonal relationships. Relationships, in their myriad forms, act as mirrors, reflecting back to us not only our conscious selves, but also the hidden contours of our shadow. These relationships can trigger disowned qualities, both positive and negative. The other person may seem irritating, but that is because they are expressing our shadow. It is therefore essential to understand how the shadow manifests in interpersonal relationships, for if we do not, we risk projecting our inner demons onto those closest to us. How then does this hidden aspect of ourselves shape our connections with others, and what can we do to foster healthier, more authentic relationships? One of the most fascinating aspects of interpersonal dynamics is the phenomenon of attraction, which is often rooted in our unconscious recognition of disowned shadow qualities. We are often drawn to individuals who embody traits that we have suppressed or rejected within ourselves, both positive and negative. For instance, someone who represses their own spontaneity and adventurousness might find themselves irresistibly drawn to a free-spirited, risk-taking individual. Conversely, someone who disowns their own anger and assertiveness might be attracted to someone who is confrontational and outspoken. However, it is essential to approach these attractions and triggers ethically and with caution, for the dark triad traits can lead to manipulation and exploitation, wielding these concepts for nefarious purposes. Therefore, the challenge is to recognize these shadow qualities in others without succumbing to unethical behavior. Projection plays a significant role in shaping our perceptions of others, often leading to both idealization and demonization. We tend to project our own shadow qualities onto our partners, seeing them as either perfect embodiments of our disowned virtues or deeply flawed representations of our suppressed vices. This is especially true in the early stages of a relationship, when we are still getting to know someone and are more prone to idealizing them. The other person's qualities may seem immense until we understand that those are our own qualities. However, such projections can create unrealistic expectations and lead to disappointment and conflict, for no one can live up to the impossible standards we set for them. Instead, we must approach these individuals responsibly and see them for who they truly are. What then can we do to foster greater understanding, empathy, and authentic connection? Consider the example of a romantic relationship where one partner idealizes the other as a brilliant and successful entrepreneur, projecting their own disowned ambition and drive onto them. Initially, they may be completely enamored with their partner's achievements, seeing them as the embodiment of everything they wish they could be. However, as the relationship progresses, they may begin to resent their partner's success, feeling inadequate and envious. This resentment is often a result of their own unacknowledged shadow qualities, for they are projecting their own suppressed ambition onto their partner, rather than recognizing it within themselves. Similarly, in familial relationships, a parent might demonize a child for being lazy or irresponsible, projecting their own disowned procrastination and lack of discipline onto them. The ethical solution is to challenge our own perceptions. How can we become more aware of our shadow projections in relationships, and how can we use this awareness to foster greater understanding, empathy, and authentic connection? The first step is self-reflection, for we must be willing to examine our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to identify the shadow qualities that we are projecting onto others. Communication is also key, for we must be able to express our needs and concerns in a healthy and constructive way without resorting to blame or criticism. Moreover, it is necessary to seek feedback from trusted sources, such as friends, family members, or therapists, who can provide valuable insights into our blind spots and help us to see ourselves more clearly. By engaging in couples or family therapy, we can learn to navigate the complex dynamics of shadow projection and foster greater understanding and empathy within our relationships. But let us now look at a case study of a prominent relationship to illustrate these points further. The relationship between Carl Jung and his wife, Emma Jung, offers a compelling case study of the complex and often turbulent dynamics of shadow projection and integration. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and Emma Jung, who was also an analytical psychologist, although often uncredited, experienced a relationship marked by both creative synergy and significant conflict. Emma Jung dedicated much of her life to supporting her husband's work, raising their children, and managing their household. However, their relationship was complicated by Carl's long-term affair with Tony Wolfe, a former patient who became one of his closest collaborators and intellectual companions. Carl's relationship with Tony lasted for several decades and was a major source of pain and conflict. How did these shadow projections influence their relationship? Carl projected his anima, or feminine soul image, onto Emma, idealizing her as a source of intuition, wisdom, and emotional support. He saw her as the embodiment of his own disowned feminine qualities, relying on her to provide balance and grounding in his life. Emma, in turn, projected her animus, or masculine soul image, onto Carl, seeing him as a brilliant and powerful leader. She admired his intellectual prowess and his ability to articulate complex ideas, viewing him as a source of strength and guidance. These projections contributed to their creative collaboration and intellectual partnership, as they inspired and challenged each other to develop their ideas further. However, they also led to unrealistic expectations and disappointment, as neither partner could fully live up to the idealized image that the other had created. But of course, the story does not end there. Shadow qualities emerged in their relationship, such as Carl's tendency towards emotional detachment and Emma's repressed anger and resentment. Carl's emotional detachment led to feelings of isolation and neglect for Emma, while his projection of the anima onto other women, most notably Tony Wolfe, caused significant marital strain. Emma's repressed anger and resentment manifested as passive-aggressive behavior and a reluctance to assert her own needs, leading to further conflict and misunderstandings. The ethical implications of these shadow expressions cannot be ignored, for they created a dynamic of power imbalance and emotional manipulation within their relationship. The fact that Carl and Emma were both analytical psychologists did not preclude these negative behaviors. All relationships contain these negative qualities. How can we determine if the dark triad influenced their behavior? Applying the dark triad tests to this relationship reveals aspects of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy in both Carl and Emma. Carl's narcissism may have manifested as a sense of intellectual superiority and a need for admiration, leading him to prioritize his own work and ideas over Emma's needs and feelings. His Machiavellianism may have been evident in his willingness to manipulate situations and people to achieve his goals, as seen in his affair with Tony Wolfe. Emma's psychopathy may have been expressed as a lack of empathy towards Carl's emotional struggles and a tendency towards vindictiveness. While everyone is capable of these qualities, it is essential to recognize how they can manifest in relationships and lead to unethical behavior. How can we learn from these situations? What lessons can be learned from the Jung's relationship about the challenges and opportunities of shadow integration in intimate partnerships? The most important takeaway is the importance of self-awareness, communication, and a willingness to confront our own shadow qualities in relationships. We must be willing to examine our own projections, recognize our own flaws and limitations, and take responsibility for our own actions. We must also be willing to communicate our needs and concerns in a healthy and constructive way, and to listen to our partner's perspective with empathy and understanding. Moreover, it may be necessary to seek guidance from trusted sources and engage in couples therapy or shadow work to gain deeper insights into our relationship dynamics and develop healthier patterns of interaction. With that in mind, how are modern relationships different, and how are they the same? Analyzing modern relationship dynamics, we can see both similarities and differences when compared to the Jung case study. The ethical considerations remain paramount, but modern expectations, challenges, and the potential pitfalls of social interactions have changed significantly. Social media, in particular, has had a profound impact on relationships, leading to the rise of online dating, social comparison, and the performance of idealized identities. On the one hand, social media has made it easier to connect with potential partners and maintain long-distance relationships. However, it has also created new opportunities for infidelity, deception, and the erosion of trust. Social media has also provided a means of ethical connection. What are we to do? Consider the common relationship issue of ghosting, where one partner abruptly ends a relationship without explanation, cutting off all communication. Through the lens of shadow projection and ethical responsibility, ghosting can be seen as a way of avoiding uncomfortable emotions, such as guilt, shame, or fear of confrontation. The ghoster projects their own disowned cowardice and lack of empathy onto the other partner, seeing them as someone who is not worthy of an explanation or closure. From an ethical standpoint, ghosting is a deeply irresponsible act, for it deprives the other partner of the opportunity to understand what went wrong and to heal from the experience. How can ethical shadow work transform relationships? Ethical shadow work can transform relationships, leading to greater empathy, trust, and intimacy. One couple, for example, used shadow work techniques to identify and address their respective projections, leading to a deeper understanding and appreciation of each other's strengths and weaknesses. They learned to communicate more effectively, to set healthy boundaries, and to support each other's growth. In this situation, the couple chose to divorce despite the growth, as they had different goals in life. Consider, however, a relationship that turned abusive, where the abuser used shadow work as a means of control and manipulation. Even with constant vigilance, harm can still occur. It is essential to acknowledge that these are challenging issues with no easy answers, and that even with the best intentions, we may still make mistakes or encounter unforeseen difficulties. Therefore, we must remain mindful and make ethical decisions, knowing that we cannot control the actions of others. To do otherwise is to ignore the sacred darkness. What remains is to build bridges of understanding. Therefore, ethical shadow integration is essential. This is why shadow projection is a pervasive phenomenon that affects all relationships, both consciously and unconsciously. Becoming aware of our projections and taking responsibility for our shadow qualities is essential for fostering healthy and authentic connections, which ethical considerations should guide. This is not a one-time event, but a deliberate and ongoing process that requires experimentation with various techniques, such as active imagination, dream work, and journaling. Ethical education can be the safest route to ethical integration. Now that we have explored the transformative potential of ethical shadow integration, what remains is the need to cultivate self-awareness, empathy, and ethical behavior in relationships. What specific strategies can we use to foster healthier connections? What is the role of setting clear intentions, practicing active listening, and challenging our own biases and assumptions? The next section will explore techniques for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and emerging with a stronger sense of self, even when faced with relationship challenges. Only then can we harness the transformative potential of embracing sacred darkness ethically, leading to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. After all, it is through embracing our sacred darkness that we can create a more just and compassionate world. Therefore, it is imperative to ethically integrate the shadow. Is the shadow solely a repository of negativity, a psychological wasteland to be feared and avoided? While traditional views often paint the shadow in such stark terms, a more nuanced perspective reveals its potential as a powerful ally on the path to wholeness. For within the shadow lies untapped potential, dormant creativity, and profound wisdom, all waiting to be accessed through conscious integration. Indeed, we might even reframe the concept of sacred darkness, not as a threat, but as a source of strength, resilience, and ultimately empowerment. By integrating these disowned aspects of ourselves, we can lead more authentic, empowered, and dare we say, illuminated lives. The shadow, far from being a mere collection of undesirable traits, can provide invaluable insights into our hidden motivations, deepest desires, and most primal fears. By acknowledging our shadow qualities, we gain the ability to understand our triggers, identify our blind spots, and challenge our limiting beliefs. The shadow can even reveal our unmet needs and long-forgotten desires, thereby guiding us toward greater fulfillment and a renewed sense of purpose. Moreover, the shadow often holds the key to understanding and processing past trauma, for repressed memories and emotions tend to reside within its hidden depths. By confronting and integrating these experiences, we can begin to heal old wounds and reduce traumatic responses. What specific shadow qualities are we avoiding in our daily lives? Consider the story of a woman who, throughout her childhood, experienced emotional neglect, and as a result, developed a deep-seated fear of vulnerability. She learned to suppress her emotions, presenting a facade of strength and independence to the world. However, beneath the surface, she yearned for connection and intimacy, but her fear of being hurt prevented her from forming meaningful relationships. Through shadow work, she began to explore her disowned vulnerability, recognizing it not as a weakness, but as a source of empathy, compassion, and authentic connection. By embracing her vulnerability, she was able to overcome her fear and build deeper, more fulfilling relationships. Or consider the example of an artist who struggled with creative block for years. They used their shadow qualities, such as anger and vulnerability, to create powerful and transformative works of art. Or even a community that was segregated for decades came together to integrate the shadow of the past to form a more connected present. If the shadow can be such a powerful ally, then why do we resist it so fiercely? And how can we overcome this resistance to unlock its transformative potential? Our cultural conditioning and fear of judgment often prevent us from embracing our shadow qualities, for we are taught to suppress anything that deviates from societal norms. We fear being seen as weak, flawed, or even evil if we acknowledge our darker impulses. However, it is precisely this fear that keeps us trapped in a cycle of self-denial and prevents us from accessing the transformative power of the shadow. To overcome this resistance, we must cultivate self-acceptance, practice self-compassion, and develop a willingness to challenge our limiting beliefs. How can we begin to transform our relationship with the shadow? To begin this transformation, practical techniques are needed, with an emphasis on self-awareness, intention, and mindful engagement. Journaling, dream analysis, and active imagination can be powerful tools for exploring our shadow qualities and gaining insights into our unconscious patterns. Shadow work prompts and exercises can help us to identify our disowned aspects, challenge our limiting beliefs, and reclaim our hidden potential. Consider the use of symbolic rituals and ceremonies to honor the shadow and facilitate its integration, which may seem strange, but can bring surprising clarity. Consider, for instance, writing a letter to your shadow self, expressing your feelings of anger, resentment, or guilt. Or create a piece of artwork that represents your shadow qualities, allowing yourself to express them in a safe and creative way. The key is to approach these techniques with intention, curiosity, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. But how do we handle difficult emotions? Specific strategies for working with difficult emotions, such as anger, fear, shame, and guilt, are essential for shadow integration. It is crucial to approach these emotions with self-compassion and non-judgment, recognizing that they are a natural part of the human experience. Mindfulness and meditation can help us to observe our emotions without getting carried away by them, allowing us to gain a deeper understanding of their origins and their impact on our lives. Somatic experiencing techniques, such as deep breathing and body scans, can help us to release trapped energy and heal emotional wounds. Creative expression, such as writing, painting, or music, can provide a safe and cathartic outlet for processing and integrating difficult emotions. For instance, consider writing a poem about your anger, allowing yourself to express your rage and frustration in a creative way. Or paint a picture of your fear, giving form to your anxieties and allowing yourself to confront them in a visual medium. These activities have been proven to reduce stress, but is action also needed? Utilizing shadow mapping and other symbolic tools is essential to the process of integration, though it must be understood that mapping and symbolism alone are not enough. Action is also needed. Shadow mapping involves creating a visual representation of our shadow qualities, identifying patterns and connections, and developing strategies for integration. Symbolic tools, such as tarot cards or the I Ching, can provide valuable insights into our unconscious patterns and guide us on our journey of self-discovery. The relationship between ethical behavior and tangible results is paramount, for true integration requires us to not only acknowledge our shadow qualities, but also to take responsibility for our actions. Even perceived failure is a required part of the path, as many have stated through history, which teaches us about self-compassion. But is there a proper way to use these techniques? How can we ensure that these techniques are used ethically and responsibly? And how can we protect ourselves and others from harm during the shadow work process? Seeking guidance from a qualified therapist or spiritual mentor is essential, especially when working with deeply buried trauma or intense emotions. Setting clear boundaries and intentions can help us to avoid getting overwhelmed or triggered during the shadow work process. Ongoing self-reflection, ethical awareness, and a commitment to personal integrity are also crucial, for we must always be mindful of the potential impact of our actions on ourselves and others. Ethical shadow work is not a solitary pursuit, but a collaborative journey that requires us to be both vulnerable and responsible. But how does this play out in the real world? Consider the case of a musician named Alex who struggled with creative block for years, plagued by self-doubt, crippling perfectionism, and a deep-seated fear of expressing their authentic voice. Alex was a classically trained pianist, but their music felt stiff, uninspired, and devoid of emotion. They yearned to break free from the constraints of tradition and create something truly original, but they were paralyzed by the fear of failure and judgment. What specific shadow qualities were hindering Alex's creativity? Through shadow work techniques, such as journaling, dream analysis, and active imagination, Alex began to explore their disowned qualities, confronting aspects of themselves they had long suppressed. Alex realized that their repressed anger was preventing them from expressing their passion and assertiveness in their music. Their fear of vulnerability was limiting their ability to connect with their audience on an emotional level. Their disowned sexuality was stifling their creative expression and preventing them from fully embodying their artistic persona. What specific steps did Alex take to integrate these shadow qualities, leading to a creative surge? Alex used journaling and active imagination to dialogue with their shadow figures, such as a fiery, rebellious rock star and a sensual, uninhibited dancer. They allowed these figures to express their anger, vulnerability, and sexuality in a safe and creative way, reclaiming disowned aspects of themselves. Alex used somatic experiencing techniques to release trapped energy and heal emotional wounds, allowing themselves to feel the full range of human emotions without judgment. These exercises eventually led to the creation of an album that charted worldwide. What were the positive outcomes, and what ethical considerations were involved in this process? As a result of shadow integration, Alex experienced a surge of creativity, leading to a new album that was both critically acclaimed and commercially successful. Alex's self-esteem soared, their relationships deepened, and their overall well-being improved. Alex began giving back to the community by raising money to support musicians, but ensured ethical behavior. But what does this mean for the integrated self? To synthesize the information presented about reframing the shadow as an ally, practical techniques for shadow alchemy, and the transformative power of shadow integration, it is essential to realize that the journey into the shadow is not about becoming perfect, but about embracing our wholeness and authenticity through ethical action. By consciously integrating our disowned aspects, we can unlock our hidden potential, heal our emotional wounds, and create a more fulfilling and meaningful life. It should be noted that this requires ethical behavior, as there have been documented situations of harm when shadow integration is performed unethically. What key steps and considerations are needed for ethical shadow work? A deliberate and ongoing process is needed, one that may require experimentation with various techniques, such as active imagination, dream work, and somatic experiencing. Further education is the most ethical route, especially when one is not naturally adept at the more complicated methods. All of these techniques must be repeated, or progress will not be made. But what is the purpose of these exercises? This integrated path leads to increased light and greater awareness. Living an ethical life, even if difficult, becomes the primary goal of the integrated individual. These specific techniques allow one to remain grounded, maintain hope, and radiate light. By ethically embracing our sacred darkness, we achieve greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. This is how we can create a more just and compassionate world. This is why it is imperative to ethically integrate the shadow. Integrating the shadow isn't merely a personal endeavor aimed at self-betterment. It's a transformative process that fundamentally sharpens our perception of reality and cultivates a more ethical approach to navigating the complexities of the world. By acknowledging and integrating our internal darkness, we become more attuned to the shadows that exist in the world around us, the subtle manipulations, the insidious injustices, and the deceptive facades that often conceal the truth. Indeed, this is where the true power of shadow integration resides, for it provides the crucial ability to discern truth from falsehood, to see through the veils of deception, and to understand the hidden agendas that drive human behavior. Is it possible that ethical conduct depends on shadow integration? Shadow work fosters a more objective and compassionate understanding of human behavior, both individually and collectively. Conscious awareness of our own biases, prejudices, and shadow projections makes us inherently more sensitive to the suffering of others. Embracing our own vulnerability and capacity for compassion enables us to connect with individuals from diverse backgrounds and perspectives, transcending the barriers of prejudice and discrimination. Understanding our own potential for violence, for instance, allows us to recognize and challenge oppressive systems and structures that perpetuate harm and injustice. This enhanced perception is not merely intellectual. It is a deeply felt, embodied understanding that compels us to act with greater empathy and responsibility. Are we truly ethical if we don't understand our potential for unethical behavior? Shadow integration enhances specific cognitive and emotional skills that are essential for informed and ethical decision-making. Increased empathy and emotional intelligence lead to more compassionate and understanding interactions, fostering stronger relationships and more effective communication. Improved critical thinking and analytical skills enable us to identify logical fallacies and propaganda techniques, protecting us from manipulation and empowering us to advocate for truth and transparency. Heightened intuition and pattern recognition allow us to anticipate potential dangers and opportunities, guiding us towards choices that align with our values and promote the greater good. These are not merely desirable qualities. They are essential tools for navigating a world rife with complexity, uncertainty, and moral ambiguity. But But can these qualities truly affect ethical decision-making? If shadow integration can so profoundly enhance our perception and understanding of the world, how can we actively cultivate these skills and apply them to address the complex challenges facing our society? The answer lies in ongoing self-reflection, mindful observation, and ethical action. By continually examining our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, we can identify and challenge our biases, prejudices, and shadow projections. By mindfully observing the world around us, we can become more attuned to the subtle cues and hidden agendas that often shape human interactions. By engaging in ethical action, we can translate our newfound awareness into positive change, advocating for justice, equality, and compassion in our communities and beyond. The next step, then, is to explore the specific practices and techniques for cultivating heightened awareness and ethical action, unlocking the full potential of shadow integration for the betterment of ourselves and the world around us. But how do we develop these skills in a practical sense? Successful shadow integration naturally results in heightened senses, a holistic expansion of our cognitive, emotional, and intuitive capacities. Heightened senses go beyond mere physical perception, encompassing increased intuition, enhanced empathy, and sharper discernment. These heightened senses enable us to navigate the world with greater clarity, compassion, and effectiveness, allowing us to see beyond the surface and understand the deeper currents that shape human behavior and societal dynamics. Ethics, therefore, relies on greater perceptiveness, for without the ability to discern truth from falsehood and to empathize with the suffering of others, our actions are often misguided, ineffective, or even harmful. Can ethics truly function in the absence of enhanced perceptiveness? Each of these heightened senses contributes to a more nuanced and ethical understanding of ourselves and others. Intuition, that inner voice of wisdom, allows us to make more aligned decisions, even when faced with uncertainty or conflicting information. It guides us towards choices that resonate with our values and promote our overall well-being. Empathy expands our capacity for compassion, enabling us to build bridges of understanding and promote social justice. It allows us to connect with others on a deeper level, transcending the barriers of prejudice and discrimination. Discernment sharpens our critical thinking skills, allowing us to identify manipulation tactics, challenge false narratives, and advocate for truth and transparency. All of these are necessary to live ethically. But how can we cultivate these heightened senses in our daily lives? Specific practices and techniques can cultivate heightened senses, transforming our perception and empowering us to make a positive impact on the world. Mindfulness meditation sharpens our attention, reduces reactivity, and enhances our ability to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment. Regular meditation practice allows us to become more aware of our biases, prejudices, and shadow projections, enabling us to challenge them and cultivate greater objectivity. Active listening, truly listening to others with empathy and curiosity, helps us to understand their perspectives and build stronger relationships. By seeking to understand rather than to judge, we can transcend the barriers of prejudice and discrimination and create a more inclusive and compassionate world. Critical thinking exercises, such as practicing logical reasoning, fact-checking, and source evaluation, strengthen our ability to discern truth from falsehood. What are some other exercises one can do? If heightened senses are so valuable for navigating the complexities of modern life, how can we integrate them into our daily routines and use them to make a positive impact on the world? The answer lies in mindful action, ethical decision-making, and a commitment to ongoing personal growth. By consciously integrating heightened senses into our daily routines, we can begin to navigate the world with greater clarity, compassion, and effectiveness. Seeking out opportunities to serve others, advocate for social justice, and promote positive change in our communities is vital. The next step, then, is to examine a specific case study that illustrates the power of heightened senses in action. demonstrating how shadow integration can transform not only individual lives, but also the broader social landscape. But what does this look like when applied in a broader setting? Consider the compelling case study of a political leader who underwent a significant transformation through shadow integration, and note the positive impact this had on their leadership style and policies. Initially, this leader struggled with arrogance, anger, and a profound lack of empathy, hindering their ability to connect with their constituents and address pressing social issues. They were often perceived as aloof, out of touch, and more concerned with their own power than with the needs of the people they served. Their policies reflected this, often favoring the wealthy and powerful at the expense of marginalized communities. How did this leader transform through shadow work? This leader engaged in shadow work techniques, such as therapy, meditation, and journaling, to explore their disowned qualities and gain a deeper understanding of themselves. They confronted their repressed anger, their hidden insecurities, and their unconscious biases, gradually developing a greater sense of self-awareness and empathy. As they delved deeper into their shadow, they began to recognize the ways in which their own experiences of trauma and oppression had shaped their worldview, leading them to develop more compassionate and inclusive policies. What was the ultimate impact of this shadow integration on their leadership? The transformative impact of shadow integration on this leader's style manifested in greater humility, compassion, and a more inclusive and collaborative approach to governance. They began to prioritize the needs of marginalized communities, advocating for policies that addressed systemic inequalities and promoted social justice. They used their newfound empathy to connect with their constituents on a deeper level, listening to their concerns and responding with compassion and understanding. They challenged their own biases and promoted diversity and inclusion within their administration, creating a more representative and equitable government. The leader used their newfound empathy to advocate for marginalized communities and address systemic inequalities. The leader also used their increased self-awareness to challenge their own biases and promote diversity and inclusion within their administration. But does this hold true in every circumstance? In contrast, consider a religious leader known for espousing shadow work, but whose actions pointed to a distinct lack of ethical and practical application of the process. This leader, while publicly advocating for self-awareness and integration, privately engaged in manipulative and exploitative behaviors, harming their followers and ultimately undermining their own credibility. The shadow, in this case, was spoken about but never truly integrated, resulting in a superficial understanding that masked deep-seated insecurities and a hunger for power. This leader harmed their followers and themselves, demonstrating the importance of ethical considerations in shadow work. These are challenging issues with no easy answers, highlighting the need to be mindful and make ethical decisions. What is the takeaway from this situation? Shadow work is a difficult, ongoing process, and results are not always immediately obvious. In this case, the techniques were not the problem. The leader was the problem, demonstrating the importance of personal integrity and ethical accountability in the process of shadow integration. While the first leader demonstrated the transformative potential of ethical shadow integration, the second serves as a cautionary tale, highlighting the potential dangers of superficial or unethical engagement with the shadow. The next step, then, is to synthesize the information presented and emphasize the ripple effect of inner transformation on the outer world, encouraging immediate ethical behavior. But what does this ripple effect entail? Radiating light, the ripple effect of inner transformation on the outer world, begins with embracing the transformative potential of sacred darkness ethically. Integrating the shadow is not just a personal journey, but a pathway to creating a more ethical, just, and compassionate world. Embracing our whole selves, including our darkness, unlocks our hidden potential, heals our emotional wounds, and makes a positive impact on our communities. Deliberate and ongoing process is needed, and it is not a one-time event. We must experiment with the techniques discussed, such as active imagination, dream work, and others. Further education is the most ethical route, and the techniques discussed must be repeated to maintain their potency. What exactly does this look like? As we transition to the next section, a final call to embrace our sacred darkness and commit to a life of ethical action and service is needed. Even if difficult, living an ethical life is of extreme value. We must discuss specific strategies for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and radiating light, even when faced with adversity. Shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness, enabling the individual to create a more just and compassionate world, and it is imperative to take immediate ethical action. Let us continue to integrate the shadow with dark urgency and to create a better world together. But what final techniques can we use to do this? Can a company, like an individual, have a shadow? Just as individuals possess disowned aspects of their personality, so too do corporations harbor shadow qualities, unethical practices, repressed values, and behaviors they would rather keep hidden from the public eye. These shadowy corporate actions are not merely isolated incidents of wrongdoing. They are manifestations of deeper, systemic issues that reflect the collective shadow of the organization. Understanding these forces is key to understanding both business and your own personal shadow. These corporate shadow qualities can manifest in various forms, from environmental damage and exploitation of workers to deceptive marketing and financial fraud. Conscious business operations focus on ethical practices, transparency, and social responsibility, whereas shadow operations prioritize profit over people and planet, often engaging in activities that harm both. This duality creates a constant tension within the organization, as the conscious values clash with the unconscious drives. But how can something like a company have an unconscious drive? The personal shadows of leaders and employees significantly contribute to the collective shadow of the organization. Leaders may project their personal shadow qualities onto the company, fostering a culture of fear, competition, or dishonesty. Employees may repress their own values and ethics to conform to the organizational culture, thus contributing to the collective shadow, often without even realizing it. Jung writes that the shadow is prone to violence, and in a collective, this proneness can lead to tragedy. Is it possible to change the course of tragedy once this begins? Consider the example of a company that knowingly pollutes the environment, prioritizing short-term profits over the long-term health of the planet and its inhabitants. This behavior often stems from shadow qualities such as greed, disregard for human life, and a lack of accountability. Or examine a company that exploits its workers, paying them meager wages and subjecting them to unsafe working conditions. Such behavior may be fueled by shadow qualities such as a thirst for power, a lack of empathy, and a belief in their own superiority. Take, for instance, the recent scandal involving a tech company that secretly collected and sold user data without their consent. These examples are merely the tip of the iceberg. Is it ethical if no laws are broken? If companies and organizations have shadows, and those shadows have so much power, how can leaders and employees cultivate the awareness and ethical framework necessary to navigate these complex dynamics and promote responsible business practices? Ethical leadership, transparency, and accountability are crucial. Implementing shadow work principles at the organizational level is invaluable. This brings us to an important question. Is there a way to transform the entire company? What if addressing the corporate shadow was not simply about damage control, but a transformative opportunity? We can call this corporate alchemy, a conscious acknowledgement, exploration, and integration of the disowned qualities of the organization, leading to increased creativity, innovation, and resilience. Corporate alchemy is a process, akin to turning lead into gold, where the dark and undesirable aspects of a company are transformed into valuable assets. However, corporate alchemy requires the buy-in of everyone, from the top down, to be successful. But how can a company become an alchemist? Several strategies can aid in corporate alchemy. Conducting a shadow audit helps identify the organization's disowned qualities and unethical practices. However, this audit must be ethically analyzed by a third party. Creating a safe and supportive space for employees to express their concerns and challenge the status quo is essential. Implementing ethical guidelines and accountability mechanisms to prevent and address unethical behavior is also vital. This is how a company can start to take ethical action. Specific cognitive and emotional skills support ethical action. Ethical leadership prioritizes transparency, integrity, and the well-being of stakeholders. Open communication and collaboration among employees fosters a culture of trust and respect. Investing in training and development programs that promote ethical awareness, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence is important as well. These steps lead to more effective leadership. But how can a company ensure its alchemy isn't just smoke and mirrors? How can organizations ensure that their efforts to engage in corporate alchemy are authentic and effective? And how can they avoid falling into the trap of greenwashing or simply using shadow work as a marketing ploy? Transparency, accountability, and a genuine commitment to ethical and sustainable business practices are crucial. Seeking guidance from qualified consultants or ethics advisors is advisable. But what does successful alchemy look like in practice? Consider a company that initially struggled with ethical challenges, such as employee dissatisfaction, environmental concerns, and a lack of innovation. This company engaged in corporate alchemy techniques, conducting a shadow audit, promoting ethical leadership, and fostering open communication. These efforts transformed the company's culture, leading to increased employee engagement, improved environmental performance, and greater innovation. This alchemy allowed the business to thrive. But how did this work in practice? The company's repressed values, such as sustainability and social justice, were brought to the forefront, leading to more ethical and responsible business practices. Disowned behaviors, such as exploitation and dishonesty, were confronted and transformed, leading to a more transparent and trustworthy culture. As a result, other businesses began to adopt similar practices, creating a ripple effect of positive change. This positive change led to growth across multiple businesses. But what if a company is already ethical? A company that is run ethically might still be accused of shadow practices. Every company will have dissenters. However, an ethical company will respond ethically and openly to these accusations. By addressing concerns with transparency and a willingness to listen, the company can maintain its integrity and build trust with its stakeholders. In this instance, the positive outcomes and ethical considerations involved in this process are clear. But can a perceived failure also be a win? Even perceived failures can be positive. Failure allows for progress, and perfection is not possible. By openly acknowledging and addressing their shortcomings, companies can demonstrate a commitment to ethical improvement and build stronger relationships with their stakeholders. In the end, the resulting improvements in the business's success are clear. This leads to even greater action. But what is the end goal? In essence, corporate alchemy involves integrating the corporate shadow. But integrating the corporate shadow is not just about improving the bottom line. It's about creating a more sustainable and just world. With ethical practices, true growth can be fostered. The key steps and considerations for corporate alchemy include transparency, accountability, and a genuine commitment to ethical and sustainable business practices. But this is not a one-time fix. A deliberate and ongoing process is needed, as is further research and experimentation. The techniques discussed must be repeated to maintain their potency. Remember, the journey to wholeness never ends, either for an individual or a corporation. But what are we working towards? Ultimately, we must transition to embracing our sacred darkness and committing to a life of ethical action and service. Living an ethical life is valuable, even if difficult. Therefore, we need specific strategies for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and radiating light, even when faced with adversity. Shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness, enabling the individual to create a more just and compassionate world. It is imperative to take immediate ethical action in business and life. What remains is to continue to integrate the shadow with dark urgency. Just as individuals possess disowned aspects of their personality, societal structures, while often created with positive intentions, can inadvertently reinforce shadow qualities both in individuals and the collective. These structures, intended to guide and protect, can unintentionally become instruments of suppression, creating a collective shadow that manifests in various forms of social injustice and inequality. What if the very institutions we rely on are, in some ways, contributing to our problems? Institutions like education, law enforcement, and even religious organizations can, through their structures and practices, unintentionally suppress certain emotions and behaviors. An educational system, for example, might prioritize conformity and obedience, inadvertently stifling creativity and critical thinking. The legal system may disproportionately target marginalized groups, reinforcing existing power imbalances and prejudices. Religious institutions may promote guilt and shame around sexuality or non-conformity, leading to the repression of natural desires and impulses. These suppressed aspects then contribute to a collective shadow within that institution or society as a whole, influencing policy, culture, and individual behavior. But how do these unconscious biases creep into our systems? Unconscious biases play a significant role in these processes, influencing everything from hiring practices to curriculum design. These biases, often rooted in historical prejudices and societal norms, can lead to the marginalization of certain groups and the reinforcement of existing power structures. The ethics of these institutions, therefore, are constantly in question as they navigate the tension between their stated values and their unconscious biases. Consider the example of zoning laws that enforce housing segregation, limiting access to resources and opportunities for marginalized communities. Or perhaps the societal pressure to succeed to the point of burnout, leading to a culture of overwork and exhaustion. What about the suppression of grief and public mourning, creating shadow problems related to unresolved trauma? Given that societal structures can unintentionally enforce shadow qualities, how can we become more conscious of these dynamics and work to create institutions that foster wholeness and ethical action, rather than repression and division? Critical self-reflection is essential, requiring individuals and institutions to examine their own biases and assumptions. Institutional transparency is also crucial, ensuring that decision-making processes are open and accessible to all. A willingness to challenge the status quo is necessary, even when it is uncomfortable or unpopular. The value of promoting diverse perspectives and creating more inclusive and equitable systems cannot be overstated. But how can these systems be redesigned? If societal structures can unintentionally enforce shadow qualities, redesigning the framework becomes essential, with conscious systems and shadow mitigation strategies as the goal. This involves a multi-pronged approach that addresses both the individual and the collective, fostering self-awareness, ethical leadership, and systemic change. What if we could audit for shadow qualities? The process of the group shadow audit is a powerful tool for illuminating existing shadow qualities within an organization or community. This involves a systematic examination of policies, practices, and cultural norms to identify areas where shadow qualities may be present. Self-reflection from leadership is essential, as leaders must be willing to examine their own biases and assumptions in order to create a more ethical and equitable environment. Support systems and safety nets are also crucial, providing individuals with the resources and support they need to challenge the status quo and advocate for change. But how can these methods be practically implemented? Certain design principles can be applied to create more conscious and ethical systems. Inclusivity is paramount, designing systems that are accessible and welcoming to all individuals, regardless of their background or identity. Transparency is vital, making information and decision-making processes open and accessible to increase accountability and prevent corruption. Feedback loops are crucial, creating mechanisms for gathering feedback from stakeholders and using this feedback to continuously improve the system, ensuring that it remains responsive to the needs of the community. These principles, when applied thoughtfully, can help to create systems that foster wholeness and ethical action, rather than repression and division. But what does this look like in practice? Consider an educational institution implementing curricula that promote critical thinking, creativity, and social-emotional learning, creating more inclusive and equitable learning environments. Or law enforcement implementing community policing strategies, promoting de-escalation techniques, and establishing independent oversight bodies to ensure accountability. Consider, too, implementing community programs for ethical and open communication and processes for dealing with grief and loss. What these examples illustrate is that shadow qualities can be mitigated from nearly any institution. But what if systems don't want to be changed? If we can design systems that foster wholeness and ethical action, how can we overcome the resistance and inertia that often prevent these changes from being implemented? Grassroots activism is essential, mobilizing communities to demand change and hold institutions accountable. Community organizing is crucial, building coalitions and working collaboratively to create a more just and equitable world. Political advocacy is necessary, lobbying for policy changes that promote inclusivity, transparency, and accountability. But how can these steps make a difference? Consider the case of a community that attempted to implement shadow mitigating strategies within a specific institution, highlighting the challenges and triumphs encountered along the way. The initial problem may have been a pattern of discriminatory practices within the local police department, disproportionately targeting marginalized communities. The community implemented community policing strategies, promoted de-escalation techniques, and established an independent oversight body to ensure accountability. However, they encountered resistance from within the institution, as well as from external forces, such as conservative politicians and media outlets. What does success look like? The community developed effective communication and advocacy strategies to overcome this resistance, building strong relationships with key stakeholders, including institutional leaders, community members, and political officials. They highlighted the positive outcomes that resulted from their efforts, such as increased transparency, improved accountability, and greater equity. What is the opposite case? Contrast this with a situation where shadow qualities overwhelmed a community. Imagine a town grappling with economic decline and rising unemployment. Fear and resentment begin to fester, leading to scapegoating and division. A charismatic leader emerges, promising to restore the town to its former glory by targeting immigrants and minorities. The leader's divisive rhetoric appeals to the community's shadow qualities, such as prejudice, fear, and a desire for easy answers. Despite warnings from community activists and ethicists, the leader's policies are implemented, leading to increased discrimination and social unrest. The situation escalates, culminating in violence and the erosion of civil liberties. What went wrong? The ethical failures that led to this negative outcome are clear. A lack of critical self-reflection, a failure to challenge the leader's divisive rhetoric, and a willingness to prioritize short-term gains over long-term ethical considerations. Even perceived failures, however, can be positive. As previously stated, failure allows for progress, and perfection is not possible. What matters is that resulting improvements and lessons are learned. But what are we learning? In essence, we must ask ourselves, given this, are perceived failures truly losses? In some cases, they are merely stepping stones towards a more ethical path. Imperfection is baked into existence, and while we must strive for better, we must also acknowledge that perfection is not possible. In light of this, let's return to the point. Where do we go from here? In the end, a deliberate and ongoing process is needed, as is further research and experimentation. The techniques discussed must be repeated to maintain their potency. What all of this means is, we must transition to embracing our sacred darkness and committing to a life of ethical action and service, even when it's difficult. Therefore, we need specific strategies for staying grounded, maintaining hope, and radiating light, even when faced with adversity. Shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness, enabling the individual to create a more just and compassionate world. That individual can be you. It is imperative to take immediate ethical action in business and life. That urgency leads to the next step, to ethically integrate the shadow. But how? But how can we ethically integrate the shadow? Shadow integration is not just a personal journey. It's a path to cognitive freedom, unlocking our full potential and making a positive impact. What if the key to unlocking cognitive freedom lies in confronting what we hide from ourselves? Unexamined shadow qualities distort our perceptions, limiting our perspectives and making us susceptible to manipulation. Ethical shadow integration allows us to identify and challenge these distortions, freeing us from mental constraints. Consider repressed anger, for example. Acknowledging it leads to greater assertiveness, clarity, and the ability to set healthy boundaries. Embracing vulnerability fosters empathy, compassion, and a willingness to take intellectual risks. Recognizing fears is the first step to overcoming them. But what does this have to do with cognitive freedom? Ethical action relies on unbiased evaluation, and without an understanding of our own shadow, we are doomed to repeat its mistakes. Moreover, shadow integration has led to breakthroughs in various fields. Scientists have challenged established paradigms by questioning their own assumptions and biases, leading to new discoveries. Artists have created groundbreaking works by exploring their inner darkness and challenging societal norms, pushing the boundaries of human expression. Ordinary people are empowered to make better decisions when they are aware of their own shadow qualities, enabling them to choose an ethical path. But if shadow integration can unlock such profound cognitive abilities, how can we cultivate a mindset that embraces this process, both individually and within our educational and professional institutions? The answer lies in intellectual humility, curiosity, and a willingness to challenge our own beliefs. This will require us to create learning environments that foster self-reflection, critical thinking, and open dialogue, which will be discussed further. In any ethical pursuit, intellectual humility is key. Intellectual humility is defined as understanding the limits of one's knowledge and a willingness to be proven wrong. How do we act ethically without all the information? An inflated ego can lead to the assumption of knowledge, an impediment to shadow work. Intellectual humility keeps us grounded, curious, and open to new perspectives. These qualities are essential for ethical action, allowing us to evaluate information objectively and make informed decisions. But how can we cultivate this humility? Embracing uncertainty and questioning established dogmas is crucial for both knowledge and ethical action. Acknowledging our own ignorance and biases allows us to approach new information with openness and curiosity, rather than defensiveness and judgment. Questioning established dogmas can lead to breakthroughs in understanding and the dismantling of oppressive systems, particularly when those systems are controlled by the shadow. However, this process can be challenging, as it often requires us to confront deeply held beliefs and challenge authority figures. Consider the challenges faced by scientists who challenge established paradigms. They often face ridicule, rejection, and even professional ostracism. Consider, too, the ethical dilemmas that arise when questioning established dogmas. How do we balance the need for critical inquiry with the need for respect for tradition and authority? The key is to prioritize evidence-based reasoning and engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views. But how do we know who to trust? Several strategies can cultivate intellectual humility and challenge dogmas. First, seek out diverse perspectives and engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views. Listen actively, ask clarifying questions, and be willing to consider alternative viewpoints. Second, practice mindfulness and self-reflection to become more aware of our own biases and assumptions. Regularly examine your beliefs and consider how they might be influencing your perceptions. Third, embrace the scientific method and prioritize evidence-based reasoning over ideological convictions. Be skeptical of claims that are not supported by evidence, and be willing to revise your beliefs based on new information. However, how can we foster a culture of intellectual humility and critical thinking in a world that often rewards arrogance and certainty? The answer lies in promoting education, media literacy, and a healthy skepticism towards authority. It also requires us to create communities that celebrate intellectual curiosity and challenge groupthink. To understand this better, let's explore a case study. Consider a case study of scientists who challenged established scientific dogma by embracing intellectual humility and engaging in ethical shadow work. This is exemplified by the story of Ignaz Semmelweis and his discovery of the cause of childbed fever. Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician working in Vienna in the mid-19th century, was puzzled by the high mortality rate in the maternity ward of the Vienna General Hospital. One ward, staffed by doctors and medical students, had a mortality rate 3 times higher than another ward staffed by midwives. Semmelweis challenged the prevailing scientific dogma of the time, which attributed childbed fever to miasma, an airborne toxic vapor. Through rigorous research, open-minded inquiry, and self-reflection, Semmelweis discovered that the doctors and medical students were carrying infectious material from the autopsy room to the maternity ward on their hands. By implementing a simple hand-washing protocol, Semmelweis drastically reduced the mortality rate in the maternity ward. Semmelweis's ethical considerations were paramount throughout his research. He was committed to transparency, accuracy, and the well-being of his patients. Semmelweis used peer-reviewed publications, scientific conferences, and public outreach to disseminate his findings and engage in open dialogue with his colleagues. He addressed criticisms and challenges with humility and a willingness to revise his theories based on new evidence. He was met with resistance from the medical establishment, who were unwilling to accept that they could be responsible for the deaths of their patients. Semmelweis was ridiculed, ostracized, and eventually driven to a mental institution, where he died at the age of 47. What is the opposite case? Contrast this example with modern pseudoscience. Analyze the techniques used by those selling pseudoscience, like testimonials, conspiracies, and promises of easy solutions. Explain that those who engage in ethical shadow work can better recognize these techniques. Those selling pseudoscience may take advantage of these negative attributes while actively misrepresenting Semmelweis. But ethical shadow work can help the population resist these lies, thus yielding positive results. Even Semmelweis' perceived failure can be positive because this informs modern medicine. Semmelweis' work was eventually recognized after his death. His discovery revolutionized the practice of medicine and saved countless lives. His story teaches us the importance of intellectual humility, ethical action, and the willingness to challenge established dogmas, even when it is difficult or unpopular. We are closer to death at every moment, but his work has extended the human lifespan. We need to focus on better goals, which allow us to create better plans. How can we implement this on a broad scale? In essence, cognitive freedom, intellectual humility, and the transformative power of ethical shadow integration are essential. Integrating the shadow is not just a personal journey, but a pathway to unlocking our full cognitive potential and making a positive impact on the world. By embracing intellectual humility, questioning established dogmas, and prioritizing ethical considerations, we can create a more just, equitable, and sustainable future. This requires ongoing awareness, ethical action, and community collaboration. The key steps and considerations for ethical shadow work include self-awareness, compassion, and responsible action. What remains is a deliberate and ongoing process. Continued research and experimentation, like active imagination and dream work, are necessary, as well as education. The techniques discussed must be repeated to maintain their potency, and failure is always a learning opportunity. If perfection is not possible, is any progress truly possible? In light of all this, we must transition to embracing our sacred darkness and committing to a life of ethical action and service, even when it's difficult. What specific strategies can keep us grounded, maintaining hope, and radiating light, even when faced with adversity? As we'll see in the conclusion, shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness, and it is imperative to take immediate ethical action. Is this dark urgency enough? What if the very act of confronting our shadow could unlock a world of enchantment, bringing us back to the sense of awe and wonder we experienced as children? It may seem paradoxical, but shadow integration can lead to a renewed sense of magic in life. It is whole-making and thus holy, and the most important experience of a lifetime. As we repress unacceptable aspects of ourselves, such as aggression, shame, or vulnerability, we often inadvertently suppress positive qualities that may have been discouraged, underdeveloped, or simply forgotten. Consider the child who is told to stop daydreaming and focus on reality. Their imagination gradually withers under the weight of societal expectations. Or the individual who experiences trauma early in life, shutting down their capacity for joy and amazement as a protective mechanism. But the shadow is not merely a repository of darkness. It also holds disowned qualities of innocence, imagination, and curiosity that have been buried beneath layers of conditioning and fear. What if the light that you're looking for has always been in the shadow? Reclaiming these disowned qualities can reignite a sense of enchantment in everyday life. Imagine someone who reclaims their imagination, rediscovering the joy of creative pursuits like painting, writing, or playing music, not for external validation, but for the sheer delight of self-expression. Or consider someone who embraces their curiosity, finding themselves drawn to explore new ideas, cultures, or spiritual practices, opening themselves up to a world of endless possibilities. Is it possible to return to the awe we experienced as children, marveling at the intricacies of nature, the beauty of art, or the power of human connection? The answer lies in the shadow. If reclaiming our sense of awe and wonder can be so transformative, how can we tap into these disowned qualities within our shadow and integrate them into our conscious experience? Active imagination, dream analysis, and mindful play can be powerful tools for unlocking these hidden treasures. But we must also be willing to embrace vulnerability, embrace uncertainty, and allow ourselves to be silly, to shed the masks of adulthood and reconnect with our inner child. The next section will delve into specific techniques for doing just that, but as always, a word of caution is needed. Active imagination and dreamwork, techniques pioneered by Jung, offer a structured approach to exploring the disowned aspects of joy within the shadow. In addition, they can be reintroduced into life in a practical manner, allowing individuals to consciously engage with forgotten aspects of their psyche. Moreover, it is crucial not to take these methods too seriously and to always stay grounded. How can these techniques be put into practice? To re-engage with shadow qualities of joy, it's first necessary to create a safe space to explore one's inner world. This may involve finding a quiet, comfortable environment where one can relax and let go of inhibitions. Furthermore, the conscious use of play and silliness in shadow work can unlock creativity in profound ways. Consider the transformative power of imagination in reframing trauma, helping individuals to process difficult emotions and develop a more resilient sense of self. But what about the ethical considerations? Mindful engagement and ethical boundaries are essential when exploring the shadow, especially with qualities like joy that can easily be misconstrued or misused. As we've said, shadow qualities can be easily weaponized. Consider the safety guidelines for the techniques discussed. Individuals must be aware of their limitations and seek professional guidance when needed. But what about the potential pitfalls of spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid addressing underlying emotional issues? Moreover, it is critical to emphasize the importance of grounding, ensuring that the process remains practical and relevant to one's daily life. The question, then, becomes this: how can we ensure these techniques lead to positive outcomes and lasting change, and how can we integrate the insights gained into our daily lives? Self-reflection, ethical awareness, and a commitment to personal integrity are essential. Consider the value of seeking support from trusted sources, such as therapists, mentors, or supportive communities, and the need to consciously incorporate joy into practical life, finding ways to express it in meaningful ways. But what does this look like in practice? Let's examine a case study. Consider the case of a businessman, whom we'll call Mr. Jones, who came to therapy feeling deeply unfulfilled despite his professional success. His initial unhappiness stemmed from a sense of detachment from his own emotions and a lack of joy in his life. This man sought help because he desired to live a more fulfilling life, one in which he felt more connected to himself and others. After beginning work, he embraced his shadow qualities, specifically those related to joy, which he had long suppressed in favor of a stoic, professional persona. This ethical application of shadow integration led to increased self-esteem, better relationships, and overall well-being. But how did HMRO it, Mr. Jones took specific steps to integrate these shadow qualities, leading to a remarkable transformation. Through active imagination, dream work, and mindful engagement, he unlocked long-dormant aspects of his personality. He utilized his newfound feelings to become more involved in his family, engaging in playful activities with his children and expressing affection more openly. The positive outcomes were only possible when ethical behavior was maintained, ensuring that his newfound joy did not come at the expense of others. Is this always the case? In contrast, consider an individual whose shadow, playfulness, led to destructive outcomes. This person weaponized joy, using it to manipulate and deceive others, resulting in broken relationships and damaged trust. This example underscores the importance of ethics in all shadow qualities, even those that are seemingly positive. Without ethical boundaries, even joy can become a tool for harm. Furthermore, even perceived failure is required. Failures, in fact, allow us to create better plans and goals. Consider that we are closer to death at every moment. Thus, we need to focus on creating better goals, which allow us to create better plans. Consider that this allows us to improve our lives, but only if we remain ethical. But what does this mean for the world? Synthesizing the information presented about reframing the shadow and the techniques involved, ethical behavior is paramount. The positive changes discussed are possible and practical. All shadow qualities have the potential for positive and negative outcomes, and ethics determines which path is taken. Emphasize mindful thought and action. But what next? A deliberate and ongoing process is needed, and individuals must find what works best for them. Consider experimenting with the techniques discussed, exploring active imagination, dream work, and mindful play to discover what resonates most deeply. Suggest further education from established ethical sources, delving into Jungian psychology, mythology, and esoteric traditions to gain a deeper understanding of the shadow and its transformative potential. The techniques discussed must be repeated to maintain their potency, reinforcing the importance of ongoing self-reflection and ethical awareness. But where does this all lead? We must transition to the conclusion and the overall message of this exploration of sacred darkness. It's not about wallowing in negativity, but about embracing our full potential for ethical action. We must also reiterate the value of living an ethical life, even if difficult. What specific strategies can keep us grounded, maintaining hope, and radiating light, even when faced with adversity? As we'll see in the conclusion, shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness, and it is imperative to take immediate ethical action. This is how the individual creates a more just and compassionate world, and acting ethically is a constant choice. Given all this, is dark urgency enough to illuminate the world? What if the very things we try to bury, the experiences that leave us scarred, are actually the keys to unlocking our greatest potential? Our deepest wounds are often the gateway to our greatest strength, reframing vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a source of profound power and resilience. Consider the idea that these experiences, the ones that cause us the most pain and suffering, can also be the catalysts for profound growth and transformation. Is it possible that these wounds, when acknowledged and examined, lead to greater strength? Embracing our vulnerabilities allows us to connect with others on a deeper level, building stronger relationships and cultivating greater empathy and compassion. Think of the person who has experienced profound loss and is then able to offer comfort and support to others going through similar situations. They are able to stand in solidarity, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. This is not possible without first facing their own despair. Shadow work is therefore essential for healing our sacred wounds and unlocking our hidden potential, emphasizing the importance of self-compassion and ethical action. But what about those shadow elements that are prone to violence? Confronting our shadow qualities allows us to understand the root causes of our suffering and develop healthier coping mechanisms. Integrating our disowned aspects can lead to a more authentic and empowered sense of self. Consider the individual who has always been told they are too sensitive, but who, through shadow work, learns to embrace their empathy as a strength, using it to create positive change in the world. The wounds we feel as weaknesses can become strengths if addressed ethically. But how can perceived weakness be a tool for strength? Consider the case of a young woman who grew up in poverty, facing numerous challenges and setbacks. Instead of allowing these experiences to define her, she used them as fuel to pursue her dreams. She obtained an education, started a successful business, and became a philanthropist, using her resources to help others overcome similar obstacles. Or think of the artist who used their experience with mental illness to create powerful and moving works of art, offering solace and inspiration to others struggling with similar issues. They are now helping people across the world by sharing their trauma. It is their wound that drives them. Thus, if our deepest wounds can be the gateway to our greatest strength, how can we approach these wounds with courage, self-compassion, and a commitment to ethical action? Creating a safe and supportive environment is crucial for exploring our vulnerabilities. Consider seeking guidance from trusted sources and engaging in practices that promote healing and integration. But what specific techniques can we employ to work with our sacred wounds? The next section will delve into these, focusing on practical methods and strategies that can facilitate healing and transformation. But how can we ethically integrate the shadow? Practical techniques for working with our sacred wounds are essential for ethical shadow integration. These emphasize the importance of intention, self-compassion, and mindful engagement. We must be ethical, thoughtful, and sensitive at all times. Techniques like journaling, art therapy, and somatic experiencing allow us to explore our wounds, process our emotions, and release trapped energy. Journaling provides a safe space to examine our thoughts and feelings, while art therapy allows us to express ourselves non-verbally, accessing deeper layers of our unconscious. Somatic experiencing, on the other hand, focuses on releasing trauma stored in the body, facilitating healing and integration on a physical level. But how does one use these techniques? Mindfulness and meditation can be powerful tools for observing our thoughts and feelings without judgment, allowing us to cultivate a sense of inner peace and acceptance. By simply witnessing our experiences, we can begin to detach from them, creating space for healing and transformation. Engaging in rituals and ceremonies can also help us honor our wounds and facilitate healing. These practices provide a structured way to acknowledge our pain, express our emotions, and connect with a sense of meaning and purpose. But what are some strategies for reframing our wounds? Identifying the lessons we have learned from our experiences can help us use them to guide our future actions. For example, someone who has experienced betrayal in a relationship may learn to set stronger boundaries and trust their intuition more fully. Recognizing our capacity for growth and transformation allows us to celebrate our resilience in the face of adversity. Embracing our imperfections and vulnerabilities as part of what makes us human and unique can lead to greater self-acceptance and compassion. However, engaging ethically is paramount, and it demands awareness of the ethical implications of reframing. It is imperative to be sensitive and thoughtful, always with ethical behavior as the foundation for growth. But how can we ensure these techniques are used ethically? We must ensure that these techniques are used ethically and responsibly, protecting ourselves and others from harm during the healing process. This involves seeking guidance from a qualified therapist or spiritual mentor and setting clear boundaries and intentions. Ongoing self-reflection, ethical awareness, and a commitment to personal integrity are essential. But how does this look in practice? To illustrate these ethical considerations, let's turn to a case study. Consider the case of a therapist who had experienced childhood abuse. This individual transformed their own experience of trauma into a source of healing and service for others. Initially, they struggled with trauma, experiencing anxiety, depression, and addiction. They used shadow work techniques, such as therapy, meditation, and creative expression, to explore their wounds, process their emotions, and release trapped energy. The therapist was able to use this work to help others ethically. But how did they become a therapist? The therapist became a counselor for others who had experienced similar traumas. They used their personal experience to inform their work, offering empathy, understanding, and hope to their clients. The positive results included increased self-esteem, improved relationships, and overall well-being. However, there were ethical considerations involved in this process. This individual had to be mindful of their own boundaries, ensuring that they did not over-identify with their clients or project their own unresolved issues onto them. Moreover, they had to be transparent with their clients about their own history, setting clear expectations and maintaining professional boundaries. But what if they had acted unethically? What if this individual had used their experience of trauma as an excuse for unethical action? What if they had exploited their clients' vulnerabilities for personal gain or engaged in boundary violations? This would have been a clear example of unethical behavior, causing significant harm to their clients. Consider that intention is key to ethical shadow work, but it is not always possible to understand one's intention. Even perceived failure is required for ethical growth. These failures allow us to create better plans and goals. We must always take action, but consider that we are closer to death at every moment, and this makes it important to continue with a focus on creating better goals, which allow us to improve our lives. But where do we go from here? Synthesizing the information presented about reframing our wounds, the practical techniques for healing, and the transformative power of turning trauma into service, it is clear that ethical action and ongoing awareness are paramount. The journey into our wounds is not easy, but it is essential for unlocking our full potential and making a positive impact on the world. By approaching our wounds with courage, self-compassion, and a commitment to ethical action, we can transform them into sources of strength, resilience, and inspiration. These are also the key steps and considerations for ethical shadow work. But is a deliberate and ongoing process needed? A deliberate and ongoing process is certainly needed. Consider experimenting with the techniques discussed, exploring journaling, art therapy, and somatic experiencing to discover what resonates most deeply. Further education and training are always beneficial, delving into Jungian psychology, mythology, and esoteric traditions to gain a deeper understanding of the shadow and its transformative potential. The techniques discussed must be repeated to maintain their potency, reinforcing the importance of ongoing self-reflection and ethical awareness. But what will we discuss next? We must transition to the conclusion and the overall message of this exploration of sacred darkness. It's not about dwelling on negativity, but about embracing our full potential for ethical action. We reiterate the value of living an ethical life, even if difficult, and we ask, what specific strategies can keep us grounded, maintaining hope, and radiating light, even when faced with adversity? As we'll see in the conclusion, shadow integration leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. As we stated, it is imperative to take immediate ethical action, and it is how the individual creates a more just and compassionate world. Given all this, is the dark urgency to ethically integrate the shadow enough to illuminate the world. As we reach the end of our exploration into the psychology of sacred darkness, it's important to acknowledge the profound complexity and depth of the subject matter. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the hidden aspects of the self. It is now time to synthesize the key takeaways from our exploration. Throughout this exploration, we've delved into the transformative potential of embracing the shadow, that often feared and misunderstood aspect of our psyche. We began with a seeming paradox, the idea of sacred darkness. This tension between what is considered holy and what is deemed base is resolved through the conscious integration of the shadow. It is not about eliminating darkness, an impossible task, but about understanding its role in the tapestry of the self and incorporating it into a more complete, authentic existence. This concept of sacred darkness has applications at the individual level, where one must confront their personal demons, but extends equally well to communities and businesses, whose shadows often manifest in systemic injustice, unethical business practices, or the repression of creativity. But what steps are required for this integration? The key steps involved in shadow work are self-awareness, compassion, and ethical action. Recognizing our shadow aspects, we can approach them with curiosity rather than judgment, understanding their origins and motivations. Compassion allows us to accept these disowned parts of ourselves. Ethical action ensures that the integration of our shadow doesn't lead to harmful behavior. For instance, acknowledging one's capacity for aggression does not justify violence, but can lead to assertive and protective behavior when appropriately channeled. Conversely, unethical behavior might involve exploiting others' vulnerabilities after recognizing one's own capacity for manipulation. Throughout this process, it is imperative to remember that techniques alone are not enough. Safety, boundaries, and ethical behavior are equally important. Returning to the opening paradox of sacred darkness, our understanding of this concept has evolved. We can now see that embracing the sacred dark is not about glorifying evil, but about acknowledging the totality of our being, both light and shadow. The question posed at the start, how can darkness be sacred, has been addressed through our exploration of Jungian psychology, mythology, and personal experience. The true power, we have found, comes not from suppressing darkness, but from integrating it with the light, creating a more complete and balanced self. It moves us beyond simplistic notions of good and evil to a more nuanced appreciation of their interconnectedness. As we are, at every moment, becoming closer to death, we must learn to make the most of that time. Ethical shadow work is a lifelong process. This journey makes us more human. In embracing our darkness, we ignite our light and illuminate the world. This paradoxical statement encapsulates the profound significance of shadow integration. Integrating our shadow is not an act of selfishness, but an act of compassion. By understanding and accepting our own flaws, we become more empathetic towards others, creating a ripple effect of healing and understanding. The world needs people to be their authentic selves, embracing their strengths and vulnerabilities, their light and darkness. This allows for honest connection with others. If every person were to undergo this journey of shadow integration, the world would undoubtedly become a more just and compassionate place. Therefore, continue to explore your own shadows, but remain aware of ethics and safety. The long-term effects of shadow integration include greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. While all this will take practice, remember that continued learning is invaluable. Delve deeper into Jungian psychology, mythology, and esoteric traditions to further your understanding. Ground all your actions in ethics. Thank you for watching. You can support the channel through likes, shares, and comments.